Mommy. I heard my daughter's voice filled with surprise and panic. Desperately, I tried to cling to my fading consciousness, but it was no use. I fainted right in front of her. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed, having been rushed to the ER. My daughter was there, clutching my hand tightly, refusing to let go. I must have given her quite a scare. Filled with guilt, I was about to apologize when she spoke first. Mommy, the baby in your tummy says they don't want to be erased by Daddy. At her mysterious words, I held my breath in surprise. My name is Linda Williams. I'm a 27-year-old homemaker living with my husband, Mark, who is 2 years my senior, and our 4-year-old daughter, Sarah. I used to work as a sports trainer until recently when I had to quit. The reason? I'm expecting our second child. I really didn't want to quit, but after discovering my pregnancy, I started feeling unwell more often and had no choice but to leave. I was depressed after quitting a job I loved, but there were some silver linings. Mark, who hadn't been very helpful with housework or childcare before, started taking the initiative for my sake. Despite my worries about my health, I was glad to see him changing. At that time, I thought everything would be okay. Mommy, wake up, it's morning. I woke up to Sarah's innocent voice. It was 7 a.m. and the school bus for her daycare arrived at 7:30. I jumped up in a hurry. Shoot, Sarah, we need to get ready quickly. What's wrong, Mommy? We overslept. If we don't hurry, the bus will be here. While rushing around, brushing Sarah's hair, and leaving the room, I realized I hadn't seen Mark anywhere. He usually left around 7:15 a.m., so he should still be home. Maybe he's downstairs having breakfast. A little annoyed that he didn't check on us, I headed for the stairs. That's when it happened. I slipped and felt the momentary sensation of being thrown into the air. Instinctively, I reached out for the handrail and managed to grab onto it, preventing myself from tumbling down the stairs. That was close, I thought, putting my hand on my stomach. Thankfully, I hadn't hit it, and it didn't hurt. Just as I breathed a sigh of relief, Sarah, looking pale, rushed over. Mommy, are you okay? I'm fine, honey. Sorry for scaring you. Regaining my footing, I embraced Sarah. Just then, Mark, who must have noticed the commotion, rushed over from downstairs. What happened? I slipped and almost fell down the stairs. Whoa, be careful. I'm sorry, but it was like the floor was slippery. And the floor seems cleaner than usual. I hadn't noticed until now, but the wooden floor in the hallway was sparkling as if someone had polished it. Then Mark, in a flustered manner, said, Oh right, I waxed the floor last night. Wax? Why would you do that all of a sudden? I noticed it while cleaning and got a little too excited. I'm sorry. I see, I replied, surprised at the idea of him waxing the floor, something he had never done before. But he had been doing a lot of housework recently, so perhaps he had started noticing the little things. Once men start paying attention to details, they just can't stop, can they? Even though I found it a bit strange, I decided not to worry about it. A few days later, on a Sunday, Mark had to go to work, so I decided to take Sarah to the park, just the two of us. Before, I would run around and play with Sarah, but I can't do that now. I watched her playing on the swing, a water bottle Mark had prepared for me in hand. Who would have thought that Mark would start preparing things like a water bottle for me? When Sarah was first born, Mark was so uninterested in anything to do with the house. It still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. He also had no interest in Sarah, and every time I said something to him, he got grumpy and started coming home from work later and later. The fact that he now prepares a bottle of water for me is still a shock, but I can't hide how happy it makes me. Thinking about this and feeling a bit thirsty, I decided to take a sip of the tea Mark had prepared for me. Then suddenly, Mommy? Sarah's voice cut through my thoughts. After drinking about a quarter of the bottle, I suddenly felt dizzy and began to feel unstable on my feet. I grabbed onto the fence of the swing for support, but even then, I could feel my strength fading, and it became increasingly difficult to stand. Mommy, what's wrong? I tried to respond, but my voice was weak. Mommy, hearing Sarah's surprised and worried voice, I felt a wave of guilt and fear wash over me. Desperately tried to hold on to my fading consciousness. If I faint here, I'll leave Sarah alone. Despite this thought, I fell to the ground, instinctively protecting my stomach. When I came to, the first thing I saw was a stark white ceiling. For a moment, I couldn't understand where I was, but then the smell of disinfectant and the sight of a nurse approaching brought clarity. Are you all right? she asked, and I realized I was in a hospital. Instantly, I thought of Sarah. Excuse me, Sarah, do you know where my daughter is? She should have been with me when I fainted, I said, sitting up and asking the nurse. She seemed to understand immediately and smiled reassuringly. She came to the hospital in the ambulance with you. She should be with your husband now. My husband? Yes, he left work early to come here. He arrived a little while ago. He's such a caring husband, the nurse said before leaving the room to call them. Feeling relieved that Sarah was not alone, my head started to spin again, and I collapsed back onto the bed. Why did this happen when there were no issues during my previous prenatal checkups? Was it because I moved around too much, or did I eat something bad? As these thoughts swirled in my mind, I suddenly remembered the tea from the water bottle I drank just before fainting. Come to think of it, that tea. Just as I considered this, the door opened and the nurse returned with a Dr. Mark and Sarah. Mommy. Sarah, I'm glad. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, I said, reaching out to embrace her. I'm okay, but what about you, Mommy? Are you okay? Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern. Yeah, I'm all right now, I replied, patting her head gently. The doctor smiled at me. In the end, it was decided that I would be hospitalized for 2 or 3 days. After a thorough examination by the doctor and nurse, they left the room. I'll go buy a drink, Mark said. Then he too left, leaving just Sarah and me in the hospital room. Sarah seemed a bit restless, as if she wanted to say something. What's up, Sarah? I asked. Mommy, can you keep a secret from Daddy? She asked. Huh? Okay, but why? I replied, curious. Although I wondered why she was asking, I nodded in agreement. Sarah brought her face closer to mine, wearing a serious expression. The baby is saying they don't want to get erased by Daddy, she whispered. Huh? I was momentarily speechless, unable to understand what Sarah was saying. She pursed her lips in dissatisfaction and spoke a little louder. The baby is saying Daddy's being mean and the tea in the water bottle. At these words, I was taken aback. I too had sensed an unusual bitterness in the tea from the water bottle. At the time, I thought maybe Mark had bought a different type of tea than usual and didn't give it much thought. But now, considering the dizziness I felt just after drinking it, I started to wonder if there was a connection to my fainting. What does she mean by the baby is saying? Just as I was about to ask Sarah more questions, Mark came back into the room. Hey Sarah, I'm sorry I'm late. The cafeteria was crowded. I swallowed my words in surprise, and Sarah seemed uncomfortable, burying her face in the bed. Mark looked at her with a puzzled expression. Something happened? Nah, it's nothing, I replied, trying to sound casual. Well, whatever. I'm going home for today, Mark said. I have to work tomorrow, so just rest up, okay? Mark said as he took Sarah's hand and left. My daughter showed a momentary reluctance to leave. Let's go home with Daddy today. Mommy is staying at the hospital. Okay, Sarah replied, following him without saying anything more. I couldn't help but feel uneasy about her. Was Sarah really okay? I was worried, but there was nothing I could do at the moment. I needed to focus on getting discharged as soon as possible, so I crawled into bed. However, I couldn't fall asleep easily. Sarah's puzzling words kept running through my mind. 3 days later, I was finally allowed to be discharged. Since Mark was working, my friend Kimberly came to pick me up. Kimberly was a friend from the gym where I used to work. She had been looking after me since I quit due to my health condition. I was shocked to hear you have fainted, but you seem to be doing much better than I thought. I've been sleeping so well in the hospital that I feel much better, I replied. I'm glad. I was worried because you're pregnant, Kimberly said as we drove home. While having this conversation, I felt a bit uneasy inside. I had been constantly feeling sluggish and heavy-headed, but the discomfort improved in just a few days. The only unusual things I had done during that time were taking a break from housework and childcare and eating a balanced diet in the hospital. As I thought about it, I suddenly realized something. I hadn't eaten Mark's cooking for the past few days. I remembered there had been several oddities since Mark started doing housework. Besides almost slipping on the wax floor, other things had bothered me. For instance, items were placed in unusual spots, causing me to trip. I was told the shower was ready, but when I stepped in, the hot water tank was empty and cold water came out. Such incidents occurred frequently, especially in winter when cold water came out. I rushed to the hospital out of concern for the baby in my belly. Fortunately, there were no problems, but it was a nerve-wracking experience. At the time, I thought these were just mistakes due to Mark's inexperience with housework. However, reconsidering now, each incident seemed like something that could lead to irreversible consequences if one thing went wrong. Landa, we're here. Ah, yeah. Before I knew it, we had arrived at the house. Seeing my silence, Kimberly looked at me with worry. If you're feeling sick, you should say so, okay? Yeah, I will, thanks. You should rest for today at least. I'll pick up Sarah, okay? Thank you, I appreciate it. As we got out of the car together, I thought to myself that I should talk to Sarah properly once she was back. In the evening, Sarah returned home with Kimberly, who had even bought some deli food for dinner. Call me if anything happens, Kimberly said before leaving. She was like a superhero. I silently jumped for joy in my mind. Having dinner with the deli food Kimberly bought, I felt unusually well and decided to talk to Sarah again. Can we talk a bit more about the other day? I asked. Sarah nodded seriously. Can you talk to the baby in my belly, Sarah? I asked. Yes, Sarah nodded firmly. It was hard to believe, but I felt that there was no falsehood in her words. Then can you tell me again what the baby is saying? The baby is scared of Daddy. Why? Daddy is trying to hurt us on purpose and separate Mommy and the baby. So the baby is clinging to Mommy with all its might. I was at a loss for words at this revelation. Her words, though clumsy, connected the dots I'd been feeling. Everything that felt off might have been deliberately planned to harm the baby. Feeling this, I shivered. Mommy, what's wrong? Are you in pain? Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm okay. Seeing Sarah's tearful face, I hastily embraced my little girl. I made a decision in secret. I have to find solid evidence or no one will believe this. The next day, after watching my husband leave for work, I started my search. I pulled something out from the back of the closet, a baby monitor we used when Sarah was an infant. If this reveals what he's doing, if it shows what I feared. The thought was so frightening. But if it showed nothing, that would be okay too. With a small hope in my heart, I hid the camera behind a houseplant. A few days later, I mustered up the courage to check it. I can't believe this. It's too awful. What was captured there was unimaginable enough to shatter my small hope. I made up my mind. I absolutely won't forgive this. A week or so passed since I saw the footage. I left my daughter Sarah at my parents' home earlier in the day, then tidied up the entire house and prepared a perfect dinner before Mark came home. Mark, who finally came home, was surprised to see the lavish meal set on the table. What's going on? I could have made dinner. I can't let you do anything dangerous anymore, I replied. Ha! What do you mean? I didn't miss the flash of caution in his eyes. I mean exactly what I said. What have you been feeding your pregnant wife all this time? I don't get it at all, he said, trying to sound innocent. My health has improved significantly since I stopped eating your cooking for the past week. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, slightly shaken. I had pretended to eat your cooking and threw it all away. When I told him this, he looked even more unsettled. Also, when I checked around the house, I noticed the non-slip pad under the rug was missing and the anti-tip device on the bookshelf next to the bed was removed. I got goosebumps when I found these. These were just targeted at our baby. It implied I was also a target. When I glanced at Mark, his mouth was twitching as he tried to force a smile. Now that I think about it, there was a time when body wash had spilled on the bathroom floor after a shower and things fell from shelves. If I had fallen and hit my stomach, it would have been a disaster. Those are just coincidences, right? Maybe it just made a little mistake, he said nervously. I thought so too until I saw this. I thrust my phone in front of his face and played the footage recorded on the baby monitor. There was Mark talking on the phone with someone, and his voice was clearly recorded. I get it, but it's not going as planned. It's surprisingly hard to make a person disappear in an accident. Well, two people. It would be best if the baby in the belly could disappear too. Those words from the video sent chills down my spine no matter how many times I heard them. Watching Mark, I saw he was trembling slightly, unable to hide his fear. Despite being wary, I continued to speak. The person on the phone is a woman, isn't it? Once I'm gone, you're planning all these things with her, things too disgusting to even mention. You're spying on me like this. I'll sue you. How dare you? Do you even understand what you've done? Mark shouted. Just shut up. Just shut up. No longer able to find excuses, Mark's face turned bright red as he lost control and lashed out at me. Instinctively, I hunched over to protect my stomach. Just as I did, a loud bang sounded, and the next moment, I heard Mark scream. Landa, are you okay? Kimberly, thank you. I looked over in relief to find Kimberly, who had easily subdued Mark and was laughing. In fact, she's a strong woman who has won the national wrestling tournament multiple times. For the day, I had asked Kimberly to stand by in the next room just in case. Mark, pinned down by Kimberly, was already red-faced and bellowing. You think you're alive because of who? Me, right? Yet you annoy me with demands to play with the kids and help with housework. If you all would just disappear, I could live freely. Just get lost for my sake, you idiot. So that's what you think. But thank you. Ha! Actually, you just helped me a lot by self-destructing. Saying so, I thrust my phone, which was in call mode, in front of Mark. The call was to 911. Actually, it had been in this state for a little while before, so all of Mark's words had gone straight through to the police. Please, not the cops. Mark was struggling to escape, but Kimberly had him firmly pinned down, and he couldn't move. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, I apologize. Forgive me. That's not something you can get away with just by apologizing. What you were about to do. Don't say such things. While Mark was thrashing around, the sound of several footsteps and a voice saying, "We're coming in," echoed as police officers entered through the already unlocked door. In no time, Mark was taken away. Even on his way out, Mark was pathetically clinging to me and pleading, "Help me." A subsequent investigation revealed the plan by Mark and his mistress. Their objective was to eliminate me, who was in their way, so they could be together. Even if they failed to get rid of me, they were contemplating a story that the loss of our child due to my carelessness would lead to divorce. Moreover, if they could blame it on me, they thought they could claim compensation at the time of divorce. The sheer audacity of it all leaves me speechless. Even now, when I think about what could have happened if I hadn't noticed anything, it still sends chills down my spine. Mommy, the baby is happy. She says she can always be by your side. When I went to pick up Sarah, she said that right away. Yes, I'm so glad. It's all thanks to you. I thanked my daughter from the bottom of my heart, and tears of relief flowed. Mommy, why are you crying? The baby is looking forward to meeting you. I'm also very excited. About a month after Mark's arrest, our divorce was finalized. A few months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Sarah is overjoyed at her sister's birth and has now become a very reliable big sister.
I grew up in a pretty standard family, just me and my folks, living in a small, cozy house at the edge of town. My dad worked the late shifts at the factory, and my mom was a cashier at the local grocery store. Money was tight, but we got by. I was their only kid, and they poured all their love into me, even though I wasn't the easiest child to care for. From a young age, I was always the sickly one, catching colds that seemed to linger for weeks and struggling with a bunch of allergies that kept me indoors more than out. I was thin, way too thin for my age, and my clothes? Well, let's just say fashion was the least of our concerns. School was a battlefield. I tried to blend into the background, but somehow, I always stood out, and not in a good way. My classmate, Sarah, she made sure of that. Sarah was everything I wasn't: popular, pretty, and always dressed like she was about to walk into a photo shoot. One day, trying to dodge the bullies, I was late to class. Slipping into my seat, I hoped for a quiet day. That hope vanished the moment Sarah noticed me. "Look who decided to show up," Sarah sneered, loud enough for the whole class to hear. "Thought you were too sick to come to school, or did you finally find something to wear that didn't come from a charity bin?" Her friends laughed, echoing her cruelty. I wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. I kept my eyes down, whispering, "Just leave me alone, Sarah." "What was that?" she mocked, stepping closer. "Can't hear you. Speak up." Before I could muster a response, Mr. Jenkins, our math teacher, entered the room, cutting off whatever Sarah had planned next. The rest of the day, I kept to myself, speaking only when spoken to, and even then, my words were barely above a whisper. At home, things were different. It was my safe haven. My parents, seeing my downcast eyes at dinner, exchanged worried glances. "Nellie, honey, you barely touched your food." "Something happened at school today?" my mom asked, her voice full of concern. I shrugged, pushing my food around my plate. It's nothing. Just tired, I guess. My dad, quiet until now, put down his fork. You know, Nellie, you can talk to us. Whatever it is, we're here for you. I nodded, knowing they meant every word. But explaining the day's humiliation felt impossible. Thanks, Dad. I'm just really tired. Think I'll head to bed early. Dragging my feet towards the school gates, I braced myself for another day of dodging glares and whispered insults. My backpack felt like it weighed a ton, loaded with textbooks and the heavy dread of facing Sarah and her clique. As I navigated the crowded hallways, trying my best to become invisible, I heard the all-too-familiar voice that made my stomach twist in knots. Hey, ghost girl, try not to vanish before class starts, sneered Mark, one of Sarah's loyal sidekicks. His nickname for me, a jab at my pale complexion and tendency to keep to myself, echoed off the lockers, drawing snickers from nearby students. I quickened my pace, not daring to look up. Just ignore him, I muttered to myself, but the words felt hollow. The day's first challenge was surviving homeroom. Mrs. Parker, ever oblivious, droned on about the importance of attendance just as I slipped into my seat at the back. I barely settled in when Sarah, draped in her latest fashionable outfit, sauntered in, her entourage in tow. Nice of you to join us, Nellie. We were worried you got lost in your closet of hand-me-downs. Sarah quipped loudly, tossing her hair as she passed my desk. A chorus of laughter followed. I clenched my fists, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. Just leave me alone. I shot back quietly, more to my desk than to her. What was that, Nellie? Speak up, we can't hear you, Sarah taunted, turning to face me with a smirk. I shook my head, choosing silence over a battle I couldn't win. The bell rang, a temporary reprieve, but the relief was short-lived. Each class transition felt like running a gauntlet, with Sarah and her crew lying in wait to hurl their next insult or snide comment. Lunchtime was no sanctuary either. I found a secluded spot under an old oak tree, a safe distance from the cafeteria's chaos and cruelty. As I nibbled on my sandwich, thoughts of just disappearing consumed me. Hey, why you sitting all by yourself here? A voice interrupted my solitude. I looked up to see Jake, a guy from my English class. He wasn't one of Sarah's crowd, but I was wary all the same. Just like the quiet, I replied, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me be. He shrugged, unfazed, and sat down beside me. Suit yourself. Sarah's being a real piece of work, huh? I was taken aback by his bluntness. You could say that, I admitted, surprised by my own candor. Listen, Nellie, you can't let her get to you. She's all talk, Jake said, his tone earnest. I wanted to believe him, to find the strength to stand up to Sarah, but the words felt like a distant dream. Easier said than done, I mumbled, my gaze fixed on the grass below. The bell, signaling the end of lunch, snapped me out of my reverie. Gathering my things, I offered Jake a small smile. Thanks for, sitting with me. No problem. See you around, Nellie, he said, heading back to the building. The rest of the day passed in a blur. With each class, I counted down the minutes until I could escape back to the safety of my home. But the day wasn't without its lessons. Jake's unexpected kindness was a glimmer of hope, a reminder that not everyone was against me. School had become a nightmare for me, one I couldn't wake up from. Every day was a repeat of the last, dodging insults, hiding from Sarah and her gang, and trying, unsuccessfully, to blend into the background. It wasn't long before the stress of it all started to take a real toll on me. I found myself feeling physically sick, my old ailments flaring up with a vengeance alongside new ones. Headaches, stomach aches, you name it, I had it. I was a mess, inside and out. One evening, I was curled up on the sofa, a blanket wrapped around me, trying to shake off the latest in a long line of migraines when Grandma came over. She had this way of seeing right through you, and that day was no different. Nellie, this isn't just about being sick, is it? She asked, her voice soft but firm. I tried to shrug it off. I'm fine, Grandma. Just tired. She wasn't having any of it. Nonsense. You're sick, yes, but it's not just physical, is it? It's those kids at school, isn't it? I hesitated, then the floodgates opened. I told her everything about Sarah, the bullying, the constant dread that filled my days. Grandma listened, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. When I finished, she sighed deeply. Nellie, your body is reacting to your stress and anxiety. It's making you ill. All these problems with your classmates are affecting your health. I was stunned. Could my being bullied be the reason I was always sick? Seeing my confusion, Grandma explained further. Stress can have a real, physical impact on your body. It's important we address not just the symptoms, but the cause as well. The next day, Grandma sat down with my parents and me to discuss a plan. It was clear that continuing to attend school wasn't an option, not if things stayed as they were. After much discussion, my parents decided to switch me to distance learning. It was a big change, but one that felt necessary. The difference was night and day. Away from the constant harassment and anxiety, I started to heal. My headaches became less frequent, my stomach settled, and I found myself actually able to concentrate on my studies without the looming shadow of Sarah and her taunts. I was sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon, working through a set of math problems, when Mom came in to make a cup of tea. She watched me for a moment, then said, "You seem different, Nellie. Better. Happier, even." I hadn't really thought about it, but she was right. "I guess I am," I admitted. "It's weird not having to worry about what's going to happen at school every day." Mom nodded, a relieved smile spreading across her face. "I'm just glad to see you feeling better. We should have done this sooner." The transition wasn't without its challenges. I missed the few friends I had, and adjusting to a new way of learning took time. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I found myself grateful for the change. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. One morning, as I logged on to my first virtual class, my mom knocked softly on my door. "Nellie, you okay with this? Missin' your friends?" she asked, peeking in with a concerned look. I paused, considering. "Kinda," I admitted. "But it's better than before. At least I can focus now." She nodded, her eyes softening. "You just shout if you need anything, okay? I'm right downstairs." As the days turned into weeks, I found a rhythm to my new routine. The subjects I used to struggle with began to make sense, thanks to the absence of distractions and the patient guidance of my online teachers. One afternoon, after a particularly successful math session, my dad came home early and found me at my desk. "Look at you, assing your classes without those bullies breathing down your neck," he said with a grin, ruffling my hair. I couldn't help but smile back. "Feels weird, Dad." "Good weird, though. Like, I can actually do this." "That's 'cause you can, Nellie. Always could," he replied, pride evident in his voice. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The lack of social interaction began to weigh on me. I missed the face-to-face conversations, even the ones that weren't always kind. The silence of the house, once a sanctuary, started to feel more like a cage. I started to look for ways to fill the social void. I joined online study groups and even started a virtual book club with a few classmates I'd reconnected with. It wasn't the same as hanging out in person, but it helped. One evening, as I closed my laptop after a long study session, my grandma called. "How's my favorite granddaughter?" she asked, her voice warm and comforting. "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandma," I teased, smiling at our ongoing joke. Details, she chuckled. "How's the distance learning going?" "It's good, actually. I mean, I miss seeing people, but I'm doing better in school now," I shared, feeling a sense of achievement. "That's my girl. You're stronger than you know, Nellie. Don't forget that," she said, her words lifting my spirits. Prom night was something I had dreaded for months. The very idea of attending filled me with anxiety. My parents, however, thought it would be good for me, a chance to close this chapter on a high note, as they put it. Despite my protests, I found myself nodding along to their encouragement. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, Nellie. You might regret not going," Mom said, her eyes hopeful. I couldn't bring myself to argue further, even though every fiber of my being screamed against it. So, there I was, in a simple dress that my mom and I had picked out, standing awkwardly at the back of the gym, trying my best to blend in with the walls. The gym was transformed, barely recognizable, with all the decorations and lights. Groups of my classmates, all dressed up, were laughing and dancing, enjoying the night. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider, watching the festivities from my lonely corner. As the evening dragged on, I decided to make a quiet exit. No one would notice I was gone anyway. But just as I was about to slip out, Sarah, in her stunning dress, blocked my path. "Leaving so soon, Nellie? The party's just starting," she sneered, her voice dripping with malice. I tried to step around her, but she shoved me back, a little too forcefully. "Watch where you're going," she hissed, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. The sudden push caught me off guard, and I stumbled, drawing the attention of those nearby. In seconds, I was surrounded by Sarah's friends, their laughter piercing the loud music. "Look at her, can barely stand straight," one of them mocked, pointing directly at me. Sarah leaned in closer, her voice loud enough for her circle to hear. "Guess some things never change, huh, Nellie? Always the clumsy one." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and something else, anger, maybe, or just a deep, aching sadness. "Just leave me alone, Sarah," I managed to say, my voice shaky, but loud. "Oh, I will, don't worry. Wouldn't want to ruin my night by spending another minute with you," she retorted, her words like daggers. The group's laughter followed me as I turned and ran, not stopping until I was safely outside, away from their taunting faces. Tears blurred my vision as I made my way home, the night air doing little to cool my flushed cheeks. My parents were waiting up when I got home, their faces lighting up at the sight of me. But as they took in my tear-streaked face and the defeated slump of my shoulders, their smiles faded. "What happened, honey?" Mom asked, rushing over to me. I shook my head, unable to find the words to explain the humiliation and hurt. "I just want to forget tonight ever happened," I whispered, the tears starting again as I let my parents wrap me in their arms, their concern and love a small comfort in the face of my pain. After the prom disaster, I was more than ready to put high school behind me. College was my chance to start fresh, to be someone new. I chose to study medicine, driven by a deep-seated desire to help others, maybe even understand a bit more about my own struggles through learning about the human body and mind. My first day at medical college felt like stepping onto another planet. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, talking about classes and future careers. I found myself outside the main lecture hall, clutching my schedule, when a girl next to me said, "Hey, you look lost too. First year?" "Yeah," I replied, grateful for the conversation. "Nellie," I introduced myself. "I'm Zoe. Nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted with a laugh. Zoe and I stuck together, finding our way to the lecture hall. Sitting down, I felt a nervous excitement bubble up inside me. This was it, my chance to really make something of myself. As weeks turned into months, I started to come into my own. I was doing well in my classes, even making a few friends. Zoe and I became inseparable, studying together and encouraging each other through the tough exams and endless assignments. Our hard work paid off, and I found myself thriving in a way I never had before. The subject of psychosomatic medicine particularly fascinated me, the idea that the mind could have such a profound effect on the body. It resonated with my own experiences, and I dove into the research with a passion. One day, after presenting a paper I'd written on stress and its physical manifestations, my professor pulled me aside. "Nellie, your work is impressive. Have you considered specializing in this field?" I was taken aback. I hadn't really thought about it. He nodded thoughtfully. Think about it. You have a knack for understanding the complexities of the human mind and body. It's a rare gift. His encouragement bolstered my confidence, and I began to see a clear path ahead of me. I was going to use my past, my struggles, and turn them into something positive. I was going to help people heal, not just physically but emotionally too. As the years passed, I graduated from medical college with honors, my sights set on specializing in psychosomatic medicine. My family was proud, and I, for the first time in a long time, was proud of myself too. I had turned my life around, and I was ready to face whatever came next with a newfound strength and determination. Zoe hugged me tight on graduation day. Look at us, we made it. Yeah, we did, I said, smiling. Here's to new beginnings. And as we threw our caps into the air, I felt a sense of closure. The hurt and isolation of my past were behind me. Ahead lay a future full of possibilities, a chance to make a real difference. And I was ready for it, more ready than I'd ever been. After pouring years into researching the profound effects of psycho-emotional stress on the body, my work started gaining traction. I'd written extensively on how the turmoil of our minds could physically manifest, leading to real, often severe health issues. Stress, anxiety, the grind of daily life, it all could lead to negative reactions within the body, spiraling into chronic conditions. What fascinated me most was finding ways to reverse or manage these effects, by addressing the root, the mind state. This journey of mine caught the eyes and ears of the medical community. Invitations flooded in, asking me to share my findings with peers, specialists, and even skeptics. It wasn't long before my name became somewhat of a buzzword in medical circles, a symbol of a fresh perspective on holistic healing. My big break came when I was invited as a speaker at the annual health conference. The topic I chose, the mind-body connection, psycho-emotional stress and physical health, struck a chord. As I spoke, I could see the realization dawn on many faces. This wasn't just theory, it was reality affecting countless lives. I walked off that stage to a sea of applause, my heart racing not from fear, but exhilaration. I'd overcome my dread of public speaking, facing down an auditorium packed with professionals, and I'd held my own. The buzz from my presentation didn't just end with applause. Post-conference, an invitation came my way that would have seemed unimaginable years ago, a dinner with the who's who of the health sector. Government officials, insurance bigwigs, clinic heads, and industry specialists, all were to be there. As the day of the dinner approached, a mix of excitement and nerves took over. This was more than just a meal, it was a networking goldmine, a chance to discuss potential collaborations, to take my work to the next level. I stood in front of my mirror, makeup in hand, determined to look my best. I wasn't just representing my research, I was representing myself, my journey. I chose my dress carefully, the one that always made me feel confident and at ease. As I applied my makeup, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the significance of this evening. It wasn't about looking no worse than the other women there, it was about feeling my best, about walking into that restaurant with my head held high, knowing I belonged. At this elegant dinner, surrounded by the health sector's elite, I felt like I was finally where I belonged. Compliments flowed my way, each one boosting my confidence more than the last. As the evening wound down, I decided it was time to head home, still riding the high of the night's successes. But as I made my way through the hallway, a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. It was her, Sarah, my high school nightmare. Wow, look at you. Finally figured out how to dress, huh? Sarah's voice, laced with that same condescending tone, filled the space between us. I turned to face her, finding her just as beautiful and just as arrogant as she'd been back in school. The years had changed us both, but it seemed her spirit remained untouched by time. Long time no see, Sarah, I said calmly. Sarah laughed, a sound that once would have sent me spiraling into anxiety. Seriously, though, how much did you have to borrow to afford a night here? This place isn't cheap. I met her gaze, steady and calm. The fear and insecurity she once inspired in me had long since faded, replaced by a strength forged in overcoming and succeeding, despite people like her. Before I could respond, the organizer of the dinner, Mr. Thompson, approached, his concern evident. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, looking from me to Sarah. I nodded, offering him a smile. "Yes, thank you. Just catching up with an old classmate." Sarah, fueled by alcohol and unchecked pride, continued her tirade, oblivious to the discomfort she was causing. She even went as far as to bring her husband into the mix, beckoning him over with the promise of joining in on her mockery. However, the moment her husband, who I recognized as the director of a company interested in my research, realized the situation, his demeanor changed drastically. "I'm so sorry," he began, his apology directed at me with a sincerity that took me by surprise. "My wife's behavior is unacceptable." He then turned to Sarah, his frustration boiling over. "Do you realize what you've done? You're jeopardizing important opportunities with your behavior. I've been looking forward to collaborating with Dr. Nellie Stewart here, and you're here making a scene." The sight of him leading Sarah away, her protests echoing down the hallway, was surreal. Moments later, he returned alone, his expression apologetic. "I can't tell you how sorry I am for my wife's behavior," he said, his voice earnest. "I hope this doesn't affect our potential collaboration. Your work is invaluable." After the dinner, as I was leaving, I saw her, my former tormentor from school, sitting outside on the steps, her makeup smudged from tears. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red and puffy. "Hey, can you talk to him for me? You seem to have his ear," she hiccuped, her voice a mix of desperation and vodka. I paused, looking down at her. This was the girl who made my life a living hell back in the day, now asking for my help. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm not getting involved," I said firmly. "This is between you and him." "But you're like, doing so well." "He listens to you," she persisted, stumbling over her words. "That doesn't make it my business," I replied, my tone leaving no room for further discussion. I left her there, on the steps, a mess of her own making. Walking home, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. I had come full circle, from the girl who was bullied, to someone who stood her ground, unafraid. The news of her divorce came through the grapevine. I'd be lying if I said it didn't give me a sense of vindication. As for me, life was looking up. I had found someone, a man who appreciated me for who I was, someone kind and interesting. We were talking about a future together, something I never thought I'd have. Continuing my work, I felt more motivated than ever. My experiences, both past and present, fueled my passion and my resolve to make a difference. It was a strange journey, but it led me here, to a place of happiness and contentment. And for that, I was grateful.
My name is Emily, a 25-year-old with a life many would envy. My career in marketing had taken off faster than I'd dared to dream, and I was surrounded by a group of friends who were more like family. But for all my success, my love life was a series of unremarkable dates and fleeting connections. That was until a regular evening turned into something out of a storybook. It was a casual dinner with friends at a new restaurant, Savory Secrets. The place had a buzz about it, a mix of modern chic and cozy comfort. I was there with Sarah, my college roommate turned confidant, and Mike, the friend who always had my back. We were celebrating my latest promotion, and I remember feeling a mix of pride and excitement. "Emily, you seriously need to take a break and enjoy yourself. You've earned it," Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. Mike chimed in. "Yeah, maybe you'll even meet someone interesting tonight. This place is swarming with potential." I laughed it off, focusing more on the intriguing menu. That's when Mark, the chef, approached our table. He was charismatic, with an easy smile and an apron that told stories of his culinary battles. "Evening, folks. I'm Mark, the head chef. I couldn't help but overhear it's a special occasion. Mind if I recommend something off-menu? It's a creation I'm particularly proud of." His confidence was intriguing. Sure, why not? Surprise us, I replied, intrigued by this unexpected interaction. As Mark walked away, Sarah nudged me. He's definitely interesting, right? I brushed off her suggestion, focusing instead on the ambiance and the laughter of my friends. But I couldn't deny there was something about Mark that caught my attention. When the dishes arrived, they were a work of art. The flavors were complex and delightful, a perfect balance of innovation and comfort. Mark returned to check on us, and we struck up a conversation. He spoke about his journey as a chef, his dreams, and his passion for food. It was captivating to see someone so dedicated to their craft. You really have a talent for this, I found myself saying. This dish is amazing. Mark's eyes lit up with genuine appreciation. Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. I hope I can cook for you again sometime. The night continued with more laughter and stories, but there was an undercurrent of something new and exciting. As we left the restaurant, Mark caught up with us at the door. It was great meeting you all. Emily, I hope to see you back here soon. Maybe next time you can try another one of my special creations. His words lingered with me as we walked away. Sarah and Mike teased me about the obvious spark, but I brushed it off as just a pleasant encounter. Over the next few days, thoughts of Mark and his culinary magic kept drifting into my mind. There was an undeniable connection, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of curiosity, of wanting to know more about this person who had appeared so unexpectedly in my life. Returning to Savory Secrets became a new routine for me. Each visit was an opportunity to dive deeper into conversations with Mark. Our chats moved from culinary arts to dreams, aspirations, and shared laughs. It was refreshing, easy, and before I knew it, we were seeing each other outside the restaurant. One evening, as we walked through the city park, Mark turned to me and said, "You know, Emily, I've never met anyone who gets my jokes as much as you do." I laughed. "Well, I've never met anyone who can cook as well as you do. Guess we're even." Our dates were simple but special. We'd go for long walks, try out new cafes, or sometimes just sit and talk for hours. It felt like we'd known each other for years, not just weeks. One night, sitting on his couch, sharing stories of our childhood, Mark looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "Emily, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm rushing things, but I feel something strong for you, something I haven't felt in a long time." His vulnerability struck a chord in me. "Mark, I feel the same way. It's like we found something rare and precious." The conversation that night was a turning point. We both acknowledged the deep connection we felt, and it wasn't long before we were talking about a future together. Things moved fast, and some of my friends, like Sarah, were cautious. "Emily, aren't you two moving too fast? I mean, it's great, but it's only been a couple of months," Sarah expressed her concern one day over coffee. "I know it seems quick, Sarah, but with Mark, it just feels right. I can't explain it," I replied, trying to convey the certainty I felt in my heart. Mark's passion wasn't just limited to his work. He was equally passionate about our relationship. He'd surprise me with little notes, impromptu dates, and always made sure to listen and understand me. It was a level of attention and care I hadn't experienced before. One evening, while we were having dinner at my place, Mark brought up the topic of marriage. "Emily, I've been thinking, what we have is unique. I don't want to wait to start our life together. How would you feel about getting married?" I remember feeling a rush of emotions, excitement, joy, a little bit of fear, but above all, a deep sense of connection. "Mark, I would love that. There's nothing I want more than to be with you." Our engagement was a whirlwind. We planned a small, intimate wedding, just close friends and family. The day was perfect, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future together. Looking back, those months were a blur of happiness. I had found someone who understood me, who shared my passions, and who made every day brighter. It was a romance out of a fairy tale, and I was fully immersed in the magic of it all. Our first year of marriage, a blend of joy and adjustments, was unfolding in ways I hadn't anticipated. The home I had always known took on new life with Mark's presence. Our routines intermingled, my early morning jogs followed by his meticulously crafted breakfasts, the quick kisses before rushing to our respective jobs, and the quiet evenings when we both managed to be home together. But beneath the surface of our domestic bliss, a current of tension was slowly rising. Mark's commitment to his work was admirable, yet it began to take a toll on our time together. His hours at the restaurant extended late into the night, leaving me in a quiet house, thoughts wandering to the growing distance between us. One night, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, I decided to voice my concerns. "Mark, I love that you're so passionate about your work, but these long hours? I miss you. Is there any way you can cut back a bit?" He looked at me, his face etched with a mix of concern and an unspoken pressure. "Emily, you know I'm doing this for us. I need to match your success, to contribute equally. I don't want you to feel like you're carrying the burden alone." "It's not about the money, Mark. I just wish we had more time together," I replied, the words tinged with a longing for our earlier days. The conversation ended on a note of mutual understanding, but the issue remained unresolved, hanging in the air like an unsaid promise. It was amidst this delicate balance of work and home life that Mark approached me with a request, his voice laced with hesitancy. "Emily, there's something I need to talk to you about. It's my mom. She's having a tough time financially, and I was thinking maybe we could help her out, like $1,000 a month?" I paused, taking in the weight of his request. His mother, a sweet woman who had welcomed me with open arms, was now in need. "Of course we can help, Mark," I said, my decision firm. "She's family, and it's important to support each other." Mark's relief was evident. "Thank you, Emily. This means a lot to me, and I know it will to her as well." So, we started a new routine. Each month, I would give Mark the money, and he would send it to his mother. I didn't control this process because I trusted him completely. It was a decision made from compassion, a gesture to support someone we both cared about. Yet, even as we settled into this new arrangement, the earlier issue of Mark's work hours remained a gentle undercurrent in our daily life. He worked too much, stayed in the restaurant for a long time, and often did not answer the phone. The routine of our married life continued, with me diligently transferring money each month for Mark's mother, and Mark immersing himself ever deeper into his work at the restaurant. Despite the semblance of normalcy, an undercurrent of loneliness persisted in the wake of his prolonged absences. I kept myself busy, focusing on my career, but the solitude in our home was palpable. It was during one of these routine evenings that a call from Lily, a friend living on the other side of town, stirred a whirlpool of doubts in my mind. "Emily, I've seen Mark around here quite often. He's always going to the same house with large packages in hand. It's been happening for a while now." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "Are you sure it's Mark?" "Yes, I'm certain. It's just odd, don't you think?" Lily's voice was laced with concern. That night, I confronted Mark. His arrival home was met with my anxious query. "Mark, Lily says she's seen you frequently at a house on the west side. What are you doing there?" For a moment, there was a flicker of alarm in Mark's eyes. "Oh, that! It's nothing to worry about. Our restaurant has taken on a community project. We're helping out some elderly and needy people in that area with food and necessities." His explanation seemed plausible, yet something in the back of my mind nagged at me. "But why didn't you tell me about this project?" "It didn't seem important. It's just part of the job," he replied casually, but I could sense a hint of discomfort. Wanting to believe him, yet unable to shake off my doubts, I pressed further. "Can you show me something about this project? It just seems a bit unusual." Mark paused for a moment, then took out his phone. He scrolled through his photos and showed me a picture of himself standing next to an elderly man, both smiling at the camera. "See, this is Mr. Thompson, one of the people we're helping." The photo did bring some reassurance, but the seeds of doubt had already been sown. The smile on Mark's face in the picture seemed genuine, and the elderly man looked like someone who could use the help. Yet, why did I feel like something was still amiss? That night, as I lay in bed, Mark's regular breathing beside me, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering suspicion. The photograph had partly allayed my fears, but Lily's words echoed in my mind, and a small part of me still questioned the truth of Mark's explanation. The days following the conversation about the charity work and the photograph Mark showed me slipped by in a haze of half-hearted reassurance. I wanted to believe Mark, to trust in the life we had built together, but the seeds of doubt, once planted, refused to wither away. My uneasy peace was shattered one afternoon by an unexpected delivery. A courier van stopped in front of our house, and a young man rang the doorbell, a large box in his arms. "Package for you," he said, handing me a clipboard. Confused, I looked at the box and then at the delivery note. "There must be some mistake. We didn't order this." He checked the address and the name on the note. "It's all here, correct address, signed off by a Mark. It's baby supplies, diapers, baby food." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Baby supplies?" "Yeah. You sure they're not yours?" he asked, a puzzled look crossing his face. "No, they're not," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The courier scratched his head. "Well, maybe your husband ordered them for someone else. He orders similar stuff to another address quite often." His words struck me like a lightning bolt. Another address? The same one Lily had mentioned seeing Mark go to with packages? I handed the box back to the courier. "There's been a mix-up. These aren't for us." The courier seemed to sense my distress. "Maybe your husband just got the addresses mixed up." "Happens sometimes." As he drove away, I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing. The coincidence was too glaring, the implications too stark to ignore. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Determined, I went inside, grabbed my keys, and headed straight to my car. The address, the same one Lily had seen Mark visiting, was now my destination. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, each turn bringing me closer to a truth I both dreaded and needed to confront. The drive felt surreal, as if I were moving through a fog of disbelief. How could my life, which seemed so perfect, unravel so quickly? What was waiting for me at that address? I tried to brace myself for what I might find, but deep down, I knew nothing could prepare me for the reality of betrayal. As I neared the address, my heart pounded in my chest. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The house in front of me looked ordinary, yet it held the key to the secrets Mark had been keeping. Standing at the doorstep of the unknown, my heart raced with a mix of fear and determination. The door opened, and a young woman appeared, her eyes curious and a little cautious. She was holding a toddler, no more than a year old. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at me with a puzzled expression. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm looking for Mark. Is he here?" Her eyebrows knitted in confusion. "Mark. Yes, he's here. Who are you?" Before I could answer, Mark appeared behind her. The look on his face when he saw me was a mix of shock and fear. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I could barely find my words. The sight of him in this setting felt like a punch to the gut. "I could ask you the same, Mark. What's going on? Who is this woman? And why are you here?" The woman looked from me to Mark, a growing sense of realization dawning on her face. "Mark, who is she?" Mark's voice was shaky. "This is Emily, my wife." The word wife hung in the air, heavy with betrayal. The woman's face turned pale, and she stepped back, her gaze fixed on Mark. "Your wife. You told me you were divorced." I felt the ground beneath me shift. Divorced? Mark, what is she talking about? Mark's eyes darted between me and the woman, his usual composure crumbling. "Emily, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Explain? How can you explain this?" The toddler in the woman's arms began to fuss, sensing the tension. She looked at Mark with a mixture of anger and hurt. "You need to leave, Mark. Now." Mark hesitated, his gaze lingering on the child, then turned to me. "Emily, please, let me explain. This is all a big misunderstanding." But the pieces had already fallen into place. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the baby supplies. It was all clear now. Mark had a life here, a life I knew nothing about. "Save it, Mark. There's nothing you can say," I said, my voice breaking. I turned and walked away, the sound of the closing door marking the end of the life I thought I had with Mark. The drive back home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of Mark's betrayal sank in. He had been living a double life, and I had been oblivious, trusting him while he lied to me every day. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. The life I had built with Mark, the dreams we shared, everything felt tainted. I sat there, alone, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just discovered. The future I had envisioned with Mark was gone, replaced by a painful uncertainty and a deep sense of betrayal. The days following the revelation felt like walking through a fog. I moved through the motions of my daily life, but everything seemed dull and distant. The pain of Mark's betrayal was a constant ache, a reminder of the trust I had placed in him and how it had been shattered. Mark tried to reach out, his messages and calls filling up my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed space, time to think and to heal. The idea of facing him, of hearing his explanations, was more than I could bear. A few days later, I sat down with Sarah, my closest friend. Over cups of coffee in my now too quiet kitchen, I poured out the whole story. She listened, her face a mixture of anger and sympathy. "I can't believe he would do this to you, Emily. You deserve so much better," Sarah said, her hand reaching out to cover mine. "I just don't understand how I missed it. The signs were all there," I replied, the weight of my naivety heavy on my shoulders. "It's not your fault, Em. He lied to you. You trusted your husband, which is what anyone would do," she reassured me. Sarah's words were a small comfort, but the wound was still fresh. I knew I had to make a decision about my future, about my marriage. With Sarah's encouragement, I contacted a lawyer to discuss my options. The lawyer was sympathetic but professional, outlining the steps for a divorce and what I could expect in terms of legal proceedings. "I want compensation for this betrayal," I said, a newfound determination in my voice. "We'll do everything we can to ensure a fair outcome," the lawyer assured me. The process was draining, both emotionally and legally. Mark's attempts to explain and reconcile turned into pleas for forgiveness as the reality of the divorce proceedings set in. But for me, the trust was broken beyond repair. In the midst of the legal battle, I also had to confront the financial deceit. The money I had given him under the pretense of helping his mother, it was meant for his second family. I supported his mistress and child. Unraveling our joint finances and reclaiming what was rightfully mine became another battleground. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I leaned heavily on my friends and family for support. They were my rock, providing comfort and strength when I felt overwhelmed by the chaos that my life had become. Finally, the day came when the divorce was finalized. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of a chapter in my life that had started with so much promise, but ended in deception. Standing in the now empty house, I realized that this was not just an end, but also a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to find myself again after being lost in the shadow of a relationship built on lies. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. With the support of my loved ones and the lessons I had learned, I knew I could move forward, stronger and wiser.
Hey, you gonna just sit there all day? Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I was in my makeshift office, a small table in the corner of the bedroom, trying to focus on my web design project. I looked up, meeting her stern gaze. Just working, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She snorted, clearly unimpressed. Working? Looks like you're just playing on that computer. When I was your age, I had real chores. I sighed inwardly. This was a daily ritual. Ever since I moved into the Thompson house, after marrying Mark, her son, I'd felt like an outsider. Mark, a kind-hearted man with a constant travel schedule for work, was my rock. But with him away, the house felt cold, uninviting. Anna, Mark's sister, walked in, her 2 kids trailing behind her. "Mom, have you seen my phone charger?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Try the living room," Mrs. Thompson suggested, still eyeing me suspiciously. I returned to my screen, trying to block out their conversation. Anna's kids, Lily and Max, ran around, their shrieks piercing the air. I loved kids, but these 2 were wild, unchecked. "Rose, can you watch the kids? I need to run an errand," Anna said, assuming more than asking. "I really need to finish this project, Anna," I replied, feeling the pressure. "It's not like you're doing anything important," she retorted, her voice tinged with condescension. I bit back a sharper retort. Mark always said to keep the peace. But it was hard, especially with Anna treating me like a free babysitter and her mother questioning my every move. The door opened, and Mark stepped in, a brief respite in my day. "Hey, love," he greeted, wrapping his arms around me. "Hey," I smiled, feeling a momentary relief. "How's everyone?" he asked, looking around. "Just the usual," I replied, glancing at his mother and sister. Mrs. Thompson interjected, "Mark, tell your wife to help more around here. She's always on that computer." Mark looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Rose works hard. Her job is just as valid as any other." Anna rolled her eyes. "Sure, if you call sitting all day work. Mark sighed. "Anna, let's not start this again." I appreciated Mark's support, but I could tell he was tired of playing mediator. As he left to unpack, Mrs. Thompson gave me a look that could curdle milk. "Remember, Rose, this is my house. You follow my rules," she said sharply. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. I was an orphan, with no family to turn to. This was my home now, but it didn't feel like it. As I turned back to my computer, I promised myself that things would change. Mark and I were saving for our own place. A home where respect and kindness weren't foreign concepts. A place where I could work in peace, love openly, and be myself. The house was buzzing with noise, but I felt more alone than ever. Mark had just left for another one of his work trips, and the emptiness he left behind was tangible. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix myself some toast, when Mrs. Thompson barged in. "Can't you make something more useful? You're always eating bread. No wonder you're so skinny," she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. "Just not very hungry, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "You'd be hungry if you did some real work around here," she shot back, rummaging through the fridge. I sighed and left the kitchen with my toast. Eating in my room seemed like a better option than enduring another round of criticism. Later, as I tried to concentrate on my work, Anna's voice echoed from the hallway. "Rose, can you watch the kids again? I've got to run out." "Anna, I really need to get this work done. It's important," I responded, feeling the frustration build up. "Oh, come on, it's just clicking around on a computer. How hard can it be?" Anna retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to argue. It was easier to agree than to start another fight. Fine, I'll watch them, I conceded. As I tried to manage Lily and Max, who were more interested in playing tag around my workspace, I realized how isolated I felt in this house. Surrounded by people, yet so alone. That night, I heard Anna and Mrs. Thompson talking in the living room. She's not right for Mark. Just sits in her room all day, doing God knows what on that computer. Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp and clear. Yeah, and have you noticed how she never joins us for meals anymore? As if she's too good for us, Anna added, her words like daggers. I lay in bed, their words stinging. I missed Mark's presence, his understanding. He was the buffer between me and their constant judgment. Without him, it felt like I was an easy target. The next day, as I made myself another solitary meal, Mrs. Thompson walked in. You know, if you spent more time with us, maybe you'd feel more part of the family, she said, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, feeling the irony of her words. I try, Mrs. Thompson, but it's hard when I feel like everything I do is wrong in your eyes, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She just huffed and walked out, leaving me alone again. I realized then that no matter how much I tried, I would always be an outsider in this house. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And with Mark away, the thin veneer of family harmony was quickly unraveling. The day started like any other, but it turned into the worst day of my life. I was in my room, headphones on, when Anna barged in without knocking. Your phone's been ringing off the hook, she said, her voice unusually somber. I pulled off my headphones, feeling a knot in my stomach. Who is it? I asked, reaching for my phone. It's Mark's company, she replied, avoiding my gaze. My hands trembled as I answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were like a sledgehammer. There's been an accident. Mark's plane. I'm so sorry. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My whole world collapsed in that moment. Mark, my husband, my best friend, gone. I don't remember much after that. I vaguely recall Mrs. Thompson and Anna in the living room, their voices a distant echo. Did you hear about Mark? Mrs. Thompson's voice was flat, almost emotionless. Yeah, what a shame. But you know, with his job, it was always a risk, Anna replied, her tone too casual for the gravity of the situation. Their words felt like a betrayal. Where was the grief? The loss? It was as if Mark was just an inconvenience removed from their lives. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in the house, barely eating, barely existing. Mark's funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of my loneliness, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. But a new shock awaited me. Amidst my sorrow, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confusing mix of joy and heartache. A part of Mark was still with me, yet he'd never know. After the funeral, Mrs. Thompson's true colors shone brighter than ever. Rose, we need to talk about the house, she said, her voice cold and calculating. I looked at her, not comprehending. What about the house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You can't stay here anymore. Now that Mark's gone, there's no reason for you to be here, she stated bluntly. I felt the room spin. But this was my home with Mark, I protested weakly. Was. Past tense. You need to find somewhere else to live, she said, her eyes void of any sympathy. Anna chimed in. Yeah, Rose, it's time to move on. You don't really belong here anyway. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice shaky. I'm pregnant. Mark was going to be a father. Their reaction was nothing like I expected. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. Pregnant? That's convenient. Trying to find a reason to stay here, are you? Anna joined in. Yeah, right. As if we'd believe that. You just don't want to leave. I stood there, stunned. Their words stung more than I could express. It's true, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper, but they just laughed it off. I packed my bags in a daze, each item a reminder of the life I had lost. As I was about to leave, I turned to them. You're kicking me out at the worst time of my life. How can you be so cruel? Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her expression unmoved. Life's tough. You better learn that fast. With nowhere to go, I left the house, each step away feeling like a descent into an unknown abyss. The future was a dark void, and I was walking into it alone. A month had passed since Mark's funeral, and I was living with Aunt Sarah, his kind-hearted aunt who had taken me in. The grief was still raw, but life had to go on, especially now that I was pregnant. I was in the middle of a web design project when Aunt Sarah called me from the living room. Rose, there's a call for you. Sounds important. Curious, I answered the phone. Hello, this is Rose. Mrs. Thompson, I'm John from Greenfield Notary. I'm calling about your late husband's last affairs, the voice on the other end said. My heart skipped a beat. What about them? I asked. Your husband had a life insurance policy, and you're the sole beneficiary. It's a substantial amount, John explained. I felt a mix of shock and relief. How much are we talking about? I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. It's quite a large sum, Ms. Rose. Enough to secure a good future for you and your child, he replied. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This money could change everything. I could start a new life, provide for my baby, maybe even move to a place of our own. I shared the news with Aunt Sarah. That's wonderful, Rose. Mark always was thoughtful. He's taken care of you even now, she said, her eyes moist. The news of the insurance money spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Mrs. Thompson called. Rose, I heard about the insurance. We need to talk, she said, her tone insistent. I braced myself. What about it, Mrs. Thompson? You know, since you're the beneficiary, I think it's only fair that you share some of that money with us. After all, we're Mark's family too, she demanded. I couldn't believe her audacity. Share the money? After you kicked me out when I needed you the most? I replied, my voice firm. Well, we have expenses too, and you're living off my son's money, she retorted. That money is for me and my child, Mrs. Thompson. I won't give you a dime, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Think about it, Rose. Don't be selfish, she said before hanging up. But I had made up my mind. I was going to use that money to start a new life, far from the judgment and cruelty of Mrs. Thompson and Anna. I began looking for apartments, something cozy and welcoming, a place where I could raise my child in peace. The thought of having my own space, a sanctuary for me and my baby, filled me with hope. 6 months into my pregnancy, I was finally settling into my new apartment. It was a small, cozy place, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I had just finished setting up the baby's crib when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Mrs. Thompson and Anna standing at my door when I opened it. Rose, we need to talk, Mrs. Thompson said, pushing past me into the apartment. Anna followed her, eyeing the place with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Nice little spot you got here, she remarked, her tone laced with envy. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. We've been thinking about how things ended between us. We want to apologize. I was taken aback. Apologize? After you threw me out? Anna chimed in. Look, Rose, we were upset. But we're family, right? We should stick together. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Family? You made it clear I was no longer part of your family. Mrs. Thompson glanced at my swollen belly and her tone softened. We didn't know about the baby. We want to make things right. I scoffed. Now that you see I'm actually pregnant, you suddenly care? It's not just that, Anna said quickly. Things have been tough since you left. We thought maybe you could come back. Help out. I stared at them, incredulous. You want me to come back after everything? Mrs. Thompson took a step forward. We need your help, Rose. Financially, we're struggling. I shook my head in disbelief. So, this isn't about making amends. You just need money. Anna's face hardened. Look, Rose, we all have to make sacrifices. You have the means to help the family. I felt a surge of anger. I am not your family. Not anymore. You made that clear when you kicked me out. Mrs. Thompson's expression faltered. Rose, please. Think of it as helping for the sake of your child's grandparents. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Grandparents? You never once acted like grandparents. You won't see a cent from me. And you certainly won't be a part of my child's life. The realization dawned on their faces. They had hoped for an easy solution to their problems, but I was no longer the same person they had once manipulated. Anna tried a different approach. Rose, be reasonable. It's not good to hold grudges, especially in your condition. My condition has nothing to do with this. You made your bed, now lie in it, I said firmly. Defeated, Mrs. Thompson turned towards the door. You'll regret this, Rose. Family is everything. As they left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had come expecting to find the same vulnerable girl they had once known, but I had grown stronger, more resilient. I looked around my apartment, at the little crib that awaited my child, and I knew I had made the right decision. My future, and my child's future, was here, in this new life I had built for us. Living in my own space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My pregnancy was advancing well, and I was busy preparing for my new role as a mother. One evening, as I was browsing online for baby supplies, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. Rose, have you heard the latest about the Thompsons? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and disbelief. No, what happened? I replied, pausing my browsing. They're selling the house. Apparently, they're in deep financial trouble, Aunt Sarah informed me. I was stunned. The house? But that's been in their family for years. Seems like they can't afford to keep it anymore. Anna's husband lost his job, and without your financial contribution, they've hit rock bottom, she explained. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. I can't believe they're selling the house. Where will they go? From what I heard, they're moving into a much smaller place. Anna is not taking it well. She's had to get a job at a local store, Aunt Sarah said. The news hit me unexpectedly. Anna, who had always looked down on anyone who worked a regular job, was now working in retail. Wow, that's a big change for her, I said, trying to process the information. Yeah, she's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. But, maybe this will be a good lesson for her. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone, Aunt Sarah added. I thought about how much my life had changed since leaving the Thompson house. I guess we all get what we deserve eventually, I mused. We chatted a bit more before saying our goodbyes. I sat back and thought about the twist of fate. Mrs. Thompson and Anna, once so proud and unyielding, were now facing their own struggles. It was a harsh reality, but one that seemed fitting given how they had treated me. I had learned the hard way that kindness and compassion were invaluable, and their absence could lead to a fall from grace. As I resumed browsing for baby items, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the life I was building. My journey had been tough, but it led me to a place of independence and inner strength. The day I brought my son, Leo, home marked the start of a beautiful yet challenging journey. He was a bundle of joy, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, bringing a sense of purpose and love I had never known. As I watched him sleep peacefully in his crib, I thought about returning to my work as a web designer. Aunt Sarah had been my rock through all the upheaval, always there to offer support and wisdom. You're going to balance this just fine, Rose, she reassured me one evening as we sat in the living room, Leo cradled in my arms. You're strong, and you've got a good head on your shoulders. I smiled, grateful for her encouragement. Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I just want to give Leo the best life possible. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, shattering the calm. The caller ID showed Anna's number, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. Rose, you need to give us money. You're living all posh while we're scraping by. Anna's voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. I was taken aback by her blunt demand. Anna, I'm not responsible for your financial situation. I have my own family to take care of now. You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got that insurance money, she retorted, her voice rising. I've just given birth to a child, Anna. My focus is on my son now, I replied, trying to keep my composure. I don't care about your kid. We need that money, Rose, she yelled into the phone. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could she be so heartless? Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. The nerve of her, demanding money and disregarding the fact that I was a new mother, struggling with my own challenges. Aunt Sarah, who had overheard the conversation, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. Don't let her get to you, Rose. You're doing what's best for you and Leo. I nodded, still shaken by the call. I just can't believe she would stoop so low. It's unfortunate, but some people only think of themselves. You just focus on your baby and your work. You're doing great, Aunt Sarah encouraged. As I rocked Leo in my arms, I realized that this was my world now. My son, my work, and the new life I was building. No amount of guilt-tripping or demands from my past could take that away from me. I looked down at Leo, his innocent eyes slowly drifting closed, and whispered a promise to him. We're going to be just fine, little one. Just you and me, and all the love in the world. Life with my newborn son, Leo, was a beautiful, if sometimes exhausting, adventure. Balancing motherhood and my web design business from home was challenging, but I found joy in every little moment with him. Aunt Sarah, my late husband's aunt, would often come over to help, her presence a constant comfort in my new life as a single mom. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take Leo for a walk in his stroller. The fresh air was good for both of us, and I enjoyed these quiet moments, walking through the neighborhood. On a whim, I decided to stop by a small store to pick up some essentials. As I maneuvered the stroller through the aisles, I spotted a familiar face. It was Anna, my sister-in-law, working as a salesperson. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was with her, and they were deep in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast from the last time I saw them. Their clothes were worn and plain, far from the well-kept appearance they used to maintain. They looked tired, almost defeated. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should approach them, but they saw me first. Their faces changed instantly, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and a hint of disdain. Neither of them made a move to speak to me, and I decided it was best to leave it that way. I continued my shopping, keeping my distance. I could feel their eyes on me as I moved through the store, but I focused on Leo, who was babbling happily in his stroller. As I left the store, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The last time I had seen Anna and Mrs. Thompson, they were in a completely different position, looking down on me from their perceived higher status. Now, the tables had turned. Not that I took any pleasure in their misfortune, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. Back home, as I fed Leo and played with him, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had been filled with ups and downs, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I had a beautiful son, a career I was passionate about, and the support of Aunt Sarah. That evening, as I put Leo to bed, I whispered a promise to him. I'll always be here for you, my little one. We'll make our own way, no matter what life throws at us.
It was just another ordinary Tuesday evening in our household, the kind where you're winding down from the day's work, thinking about what to cook for dinner, and maybe catch up on some TV shows you've missed. Mike, my husband of 20 years, was lounging on the sofa, flicking through channels, while I was in the kitchen pondering whether spaghetti or chicken salad would be the lesser of two evils for our waistlines. I was thinking about what our 19-year-old son Alex eats in college. That's when the phone rang, cutting through the mundane silence of our home. Mike glanced at the caller ID and sighed. "It's my folks." There was a hint of reluctance in his voice that didn't go unnoticed. "Go on, pick it up." "It's been ages since we last heard from them," I called out from the kitchen, trying to sound more enthusiastic than I felt. Mike's parents, Linda and George, weren't exactly the easiest people to get along with. Their rare calls usually meant they wanted something. Mike pressed the speaker button, and we both braced ourselves. "Hey, Mom, Dad, what's up?" The voice that came through was Linda's, choked with tears. "Oh, Mike, it's all gone. Everything's gone." George's gruffer, more panicked tone interjected. "The company, son. It tanked. We've lost the house, the cars, everything." I stopped what I was doing, the gravity of their situation sinking in. Mike and I exchanged worried glances. Despite our strained relationship, hearing them so vulnerable struck a chord. "So, what's the plan now? Where are you guys staying?" Mike asked, his voice tight with concern. "That's just it, son. We have nowhere to go. We were hoping, maybe, we could come stay with you and Karine for a while." Linda's voice was hopeful, yet hesitant. Mike ran a hand through his hair, a clear sign he was stressed. "Well, you know the house is actually Karine's, left to her by her grandma. I gotta talk to her about it." I knew what was coming next. As much as Linda and George could be a handful, they were still his parents. Turning them away wasn't an option, not really. I walked into the living room, taking the phone from Mike. "Linda, George, listen, we can figure something out. But it's only temporary, okay? Just until you get back on your feet." "Oh, thank you, dear. You're a lifesaver. We won't be any trouble, promise," Linda gushed, relief evident in her voice. After we hung up, Mike slumped back on the couch, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "Babe, you sure about this? You know how they are. Always looking down on our lifestyle, expecting the moon." I sighed, sitting next to him, taking his hand. I know. But they're your folks. What else can we do? We'll set some ground rules. Make it clear it's just for a few months." Mike nodded, looking somewhat relieved but still anxious. "They mentioned bringing some things. I hope it's not their entire house." The morning Linda and George were due to arrive felt like the calm before the storm. Mike and I had been up since dawn, double-checking every room to ensure everything was as comfortable as possible. Our attempt to bring some order before the inevitable chaos. "Karine, do you think they'll like the setup in their room?" Mike asked for what felt like the 10th time, his forehead creased with worry. I shrugged, adjusting a pillow for the umpteenth time. "They'll have to. It's not the Ritz, but it's the best we can do." The sound of engines rumbling down our street cut our conversation short. We exchanged a look that said, "Here we go," and made our way to the front door. As we stepped outside, two massive moving trucks pulled up, blocking our driveway. Jesus, did they bring the whole house? I muttered under my breath as Mike squeezed my hand, a silent plea for patience. Linda and George emerged from a sleek rental car, looking every bit the displaced royalty. Linda, with her fur coat draped over her shoulders, despite the mild weather, and George, in a suit that looked too formal for our quiet, suburban street. "Karine, Mike. Oh, how we've missed you!" Linda exclaimed, embracing me with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of me. "Good to see you, Mom, Dad," Mike managed, his voice tight as he accepted their hugs. As the movers began unloading, the sheer volume of some things they'd mentioned became horrifyingly clear. Furniture, boxes, more boxes, and endless bags started piling up in our driveway. Mike and I helped direct the movers, but it quickly became apparent that our house was not prepared for the influx. Every room on the ground floor was soon crowded with their belongings, leaving just narrow paths to navigate through. As the movers left, George clapped his hands together, looking pleased. "Well, this feels homier already, doesn't it?" That evening, after a day of moving and rearranging, we sat down for dinner. The air was thick with tension, an uncomfortable blend of gratitude and resentment simmering just below the surface. "So, Corinne, this spaghetti is interesting," Linda remarked, poking at her plate with a fork as if she expected it to bite back. "It's a family recipe," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Simple but good." Was all she said, but her expression spoke volumes. Mike, sensing my growing frustration, jumped in. "Mom, Dad, we're really glad we could help out in your time of need. But we need to remember we're all in this together. It's going to be a bit of an adjustment for everyone." The conversation stumbled along, a clumsy dance around the obvious elephants in the room. After dinner, as we were clearing the table, Mike pulled me aside. "Corinne, this is going to be harder than we thought," he whispered, his eyes filled with concern. I sighed, leaning into him. "We knew it wouldn't be easy. But we'll make it work. Somehow." The initial excitement of Linda and George's arrival quickly faded, replaced by the daily grind and growing tensions. It wasn't long before their true colors started to show, and with it, the first of many demands. One morning, barely a week into their stay, I was in the kitchen whipping up what I considered a decent breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and some fresh fruit on the side. Simple, yet filling. That's when Linda strolled in, a look of disdain plastered across her face as she eyed the plates on the counter. "Corinne, darling, is this what you call breakfast?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. I turned, forcing a smile. "It's what we usually have. Keeps us going until lunch." Linda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. No, this won't do at all. Back in our house, we had freshly squeezed orange juice, croissants, and sometimes even smoked salmon for breakfast. You must try a bit harder, dear." I felt a knot form in my stomach, frustration bubbling up. "Linda, you know we're not living in luxury here. This is what we eat. If you'd like something else, you're welcome to make it." The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Mike caught my eye, giving me a sympathetic look that said he'd handle it later. But breakfast was just the beginning. Later that week, George approached me as I was sorting the laundry, a list in hand. "Corinne, we need to talk about the groceries. This list here," he said, waving the paper in front of me, "is what Linda and I usually enjoy. We've been very accommodating, but it's time we return to some semblance of our normal lifestyle." I took the list, my eyes widening as I scanned the items. Marbled steaks, exotic fruits, imported cheeses. The price of these items would blow our grocery budget out of the water. "George, you do realize we're on a budget, right? We can't afford these things on a regular basis." He frowned, crossing his arms. "Well, you'll just have to make do, won't you? We can't be expected to live like this. It's beneath us." I was at a loss for words. The audacity of their demands, their complete disregard for our situation, it was all too much. That night, I vented to Mike, my patience wearing thin. He promised he would talk to them. But talking seemed to do little good. Linda and George remained firmly planted in their bubble of entitlement, making life increasingly difficult for us. The breaking point came when Linda refused to eat the chicken casserole I had prepared for dinner, calling it peasant food. She demanded we order takeout from a pricey restaurant instead. "Listen, Linda, we're doing our best here," I snapped, my patience finally gone. "This is what we're having. If you don't like it, then I'm sorry, but that's just too bad." Her face went red, and for a moment, I thought she might actually explode. "This is no way to treat your guests, Corinne. We are your elders, and you should be showing us more respect." Mike stepped in, his tone firm. "Mom, Dad, you're not guests. You're living here because you have nowhere else to go. Kareen's right. We can't afford to eat out or buy expensive groceries. You need to respect that this is our home and our rules. The conversation ended with Linda storming off to her room, George following closely behind, muttering about ungrateful children. A whole month had gone by since Linda and George turned our lives upside down. It started with them making a scene at breakfast one morning, both of them clutching their stomachs and making a big show of how our average food was wreaking havoc on their digestion. This bread, it's like eating cardboard. And don't get me started on the eggs. My stomach's been in knots. Linda complained, her voice teetering between a whine and a demand. George chimed in with a groan, I haven't felt right since we got here. We need proper food, not this peasant fare. Feeling cornered and wanting to keep the peace, I caved. I started buying the fanciest groceries I could find for them, while Mike and I resorted to fast food just to save on costs. Fast forward a month, and I'm sitting at the kitchen table, receipts scattered in front of me. My heart sank as I tallied up the numbers. We were spending double on groceries compared to before Linda and George's arrival. And that wasn't even touching on the water bill, which had skyrocketed thanks to Linda's newfound love for long, luxurious baths. Enough was enough. That evening, as I served dinner, the contrast couldn't have been starker. Linda and George were tucking into their gourmet dishes, while Mike and I nibbled on cheap takeout. My frustration boiled over. Listen up, I started, my voice steady but firm. This can't go on. We're blowing through our budget trying to cater to your tastes. From now on, we're all eating the same food. No more special treatment. Linda looked up, her fork paused midair. You can't be serious. This food is the only thing keeping our health from plummeting in this hovel. George nodded in agreement. Exactly. You expect us to eat fast food? That's absurd. You're being incredibly selfish and lazy, Kareen. Their words stung, but I was past caring about their opinions. Before I could retort, Mike slammed his fist down on the table, a rare show of anger from him. That's enough, he barked. You're living under our roof, in Kareen's house. You will show her respect. She's been bending over backward to accommodate you, and this is how you repay her? No more. Either you start eating what we provide, or you can find somewhere else to live. The room went silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Linda and George exchanged a look, then silently returned to their meal. The day after the big blow-up, things escalated in a way I couldn't have imagined. It started with a knock at the door, mid-morning. I was in the middle of tidying up the living room, Mike having gone out to run some errands. The delivery guy, a young lad probably in his early 20s, stood there with a smirk, holding a stack of fancy-looking food boxes. Delivery for Kareen, he announced, thrusting the boxes into my arms before I could even open my mouth. Confused, I stared down at the assortment of gourmet meals, the kind that cost an arm and a leg from the high-end place downtown. There's been some mistake. I didn't order this. Just then, Linda breezed in, a smug smile on her face. Oh, those are for us. I couldn't stomach another day of that dreadful food you've been serving. I was flabbergasted. And how do you plan on paying for this? I asked, trying to keep my cool. Linda waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't worry, dear. It's on you. Consider it a thank you for our stay. Fury bubbled up inside me, but before I could confront her further, the phone rang. It was Mike, checking in. I quickly explained the situation, my voice shaking with anger. Stay calm. I'll handle it when I get back, he said, his tone tight with frustration. But staying calm was easier said than done. By the time Mike got back, Linda and George had made themselves comfortable, devouring their expensive meals with relish while I fumed silently. That evening, Mike and I sat them down for another talk. This time, the gloves were off. Mom, Dad, this has got to stop, Mike began, his voice low but firm. You can't just order expensive meals on our dime. It's not right. George scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Oh, please. It's the least you can do after forcing us to eat like paupers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Forcing you? We're going broke trying to keep you happy. Linda's eyes narrowed. Well, maybe if you managed your money better, you wouldn't be in this situation. That did it. I lost my cool. Managed our money better? We were fine before you showed up, turning our lives upside down. Mike stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. That's it. We've been more than accommodating, but it's clear you have no respect for us or our home. You need to leave. Their reaction was immediate and explosive. Linda started crying, wailing about how ungrateful we were, while George shouted threats about telling everyone how horribly we'd treated them. The argument raged on, voices raised, accusations flying. It was a mess. In the end, Linda and George stormed off to their room, slamming the door behind them. After the debacle with the gourmet food delivery, things went from bad to unbearable. Linda and George's entitlement had reached new heights, and Mike and I were at our wits' end. The final straw came on a chilly Thursday evening. I was in the kitchen, trying to make do with what was left in the pantry for dinner, when Linda sauntered in, her nose wrinkled in disgust at the aroma of the stew I was cooking. That smells, what is that? She asked, her tone dripping with disdain. It's beef stew. It's what's for dinner, I replied, keeping my focus on the pot to avoid snapping at her. Linda made a show of gagging. I can't possibly eat that. You know, it wouldn't kill you to try a little harder, Corrine. This is no way to treat guests. Dinner was a tense affair, with Linda and George barely touching their food while making passive-aggressive comments about the lack of variety. I was seething, but I bit my tongue, determined not to let them get the best of me. After dinner, Mike and I were cleaning up when Linda approached us, a smug look on her face. I've been thinking, she began, with the holidays coming up, it would be nice to have a new coat. Something warm and stylish. I stopped in my tracks, staring at her in disbelief. A new coat? With what money, Linda? Oh, I thought you could use the money you've set aside for, what was it? Oh, yes, your son's college fund. That was it. The last straw. Without hesitation, I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew could turn the tide, my grandmother. Gran, despite her age and residing in a nursing home, had always been the matriarch of our family, her word law. After I spilled out the whole sorry saga, she huffed in disbelief. This nonsense has gone on long enough, Gran declared, her voice crackling with resolve over the phone. I'm coming to stay for a bit. We'll sort this mess out together. True to her word, a couple of days later, Gran arrived, wheelchair and all, ready to reclaim her territory. As she rolled into the living room, commandeering the space with her presence, Linda and George looked on in shock. I'll be staying on the ground floor, Gran announced, scanning the room filled with Linda and George's belongings. So, all this, she waved a dismissive hand around, needs to go upstairs. Linda's face turned a shade of red I didn't know was possible. You can't just come in and demand. Gran cut her off with a look that could freeze lava. This house? It's still mine. Corrine and Mike are here because I allow it. And that means I can kick you out whenever I please. The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Within hours, Linda and George were scrambling to call movers, their complaints and protests drowned out by Gran's unwavering stance. As their furniture and countless boxes were hauled up the stairs, Gran turned to me, a twinkle in her eye. Now, let's see if they still feel entitled to steak dinners and new coats. Gran's strategic maneuvering had just begun to unfold in our household. The air was charged with anticipation as we gathered in the living room, the scent of freshly brewed tea mingling with the tension. Now, Gran began, her voice steady, we need to address the matter of rent. Linda scoffed, crossing her arms. Rent? Why should we pay rent when Corrine and Mike don't? Gran smiled, a glint in her eye. Karine and Mike live here under my grace. They contribute to the household in many ways. But you too," she paused, her gaze sharpening, "have been living off their generosity without giving much in return. I think a rent of $4,000 a month would be appropriate." George's face went ashen. $4,000? That's outrageous. We're retired, we don't have that kind of money. Gran leaned forward, her expression unyielding. "Considering the lavish meals and the luxurious lifestyle you seem accustomed to, I'd say you can afford it." Linda, her voice trembling with indignation, turned to me. "Karine, surely you don't agree with this extortion?" Before I could reply, Gran interjected. "It's not extortion, Linda. It's about fairness. But I'm willing to negotiate." She paused, a sly smile playing on her lips. "If you're willing to help take care of me during your stay, push my wheelchair around, make breakfast, help with my bath, I might consider reducing the rent." The suggestion hung in the air, heavy and unappealing to Linda and George, who exchanged a look of utter disbelief. George, ever the pragmatist, asked, "And how much would this assistance reduce the rent?" Gran tapped her chin, pretending to ponder. "Let's say, down to $2,000, provided the help is substantial and consistent." Linda's mouth dropped open, but before she could protest, George cut in. "And if we refuse?" Gran's response was swift and final. "Then you're welcome to find somewhere else to live. This house," she gestured around, "will no longer be your refuge." The ultimatum was clear. Linda and George, faced with the prospect of actually working or paying a hefty rent, seemed to shrink in their seats. The following days were a flurry of hushed conversations and frantic phone calls as they scrambled to find an alternative. Eventually, they announced they had found a small apartment and would be moving out immediately. The process was swift, their belongings packed and removed with a speed that suggested eagerness to leave the situation behind. As their car disappeared down the driveway, Gran turned to Mike and me, her expression softening. "I know it was tough, but it was necessary. You two need your space, and they need to stand on their own." Mike wrapped an arm around Gran, gratitude in his eyes. "Gran, you've done more for us than we could ever repay." "Thank you." In the weeks that followed, Gran became more than just a guest, she was a guardian of our home's harmony, a role she played with a blend of sternness and love that only she could manage. In the calm that followed Linda and George moving out, our house felt like it was finally breathing again. Gran, Mike, and I gathered in the living room one night, the gentle hum of the evening wrapping around us, making the space feel sacred after the storm we'd weathered. Breaking the quiet, Gran's tone turned playful. "Well, as much as I've enjoyed the drama, I think it's time for me to head back. The nursing home misses its most troublesome resident." Mike and I shared a look, already dreading her departure. "Gran, this house is always open for you." "It's not really home without you," I managed, my voice heavy with emotion. Gran gave my hand a squeeze. "And you're always in my heart. But don't worry, I'll be back to stir things up now and then." We laughed together, a sound that felt like healing. As we said our goodbyes to Gran the next day, watching her taxi disappear, Mike and I knew we were ready for whatever came next. Together. Our home, once a battlefield, was now a symbol of our resilience, a place where love and boundaries found their balance. And as we stepped back into the quiet of our living room, ready to face the future, I felt deeply thankful for the journey that had brought us here, for the family we were, and for the lessons we'd carry forward. A few weeks later, we heard from a mutual acquaintance that Linda and George were living in a small apartment, having sold most of their belongings to cover their debts. The news came as a bittersweet confirmation of the new chapter they, too, were embarking on, a life defined by the consequences of their choices, leaning on each other, perhaps for the first time in a long while. Reflecting on this, Mike and I realized the true depth of the changes we'd all undergone. Our home was peaceful once more, and though the journey had been rough, it had taught us the true meaning of family, resilience, and love. Ever since I can remember, my life's been all about fish and farm. Dad had this big vision of making our place the top trout hatchery in the country, and darn if he didn't make it happen. I was right there beside him, knee-deep in pond water, learning the ropes. It wasn't just a job, it was our life, our legacy. I grew up chasing the shadows of fish in the water, learning the ins and outs of the business before I even knew what the word business meant. "Anna," Dad would call. "Get over here. Time you learned how to sort 'em proper." Sorting the trout was an art, separating the vibrant, thrashing life into groups that would define their journey in our farm. One evening, when the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Dad pulled me aside. He had that look in his eyes, the one that said he was about to impart wisdom. "Look, kiddo," he started, his voice serious, "I ain't gonna be around forever. He gestured to the expanse of water and land that stretched out before us, "this is gonna be yours. You gotta be ready to take care of it, expand it, make it something even bigger." I remember laughing it off then. "Come on, Dad. You're gonna outlive us all," I joked, not wanting to think about a world without him. He just shook his head, his eyes softening. "Just promise me, Anna. Promise me you'll keep this place alive, make it thrive." Then, when I hit 25, cancer took Dad away. It hit us like a ton of bricks. Mom, she just couldn't handle it, got real sick herself. So, there I was, stuck with running the whole shebang. Dad always had big dreams for the place, and I wasn't about to let them die with him. He'd talked about branching out into ornamental fish and even starting up a livestock bit, considering all the land we had. Sounded like a plan, but with Mom sick and the farm needing all hands on deck, my dreams had to take a back seat. I hired a few folks to help out with the heavy lifting. Running a fish farm's no joke. There's the feeding, the cleaning, making sure everything's running smooth. It's a never-ending cycle of work, but someone's gotta do it. Late nights, I'd find myself by the pond, just staring at the water, thinking about Dad. He wanted this life for me, but man, it was tough going it alone. "You got this, girl," he'd say if he could see me now, trying to juggle it all. But those moments of missing him, they couldn't last long. There was always something needing doing. Workers to oversee, fish food to buy, tanks to clean, and not to mention looking after Mom. She was a fighter, but this had knocked her down hard. It wasn't easy, keeping things afloat. But I was determined. Dad had built something amazing here, and I wasn't about to let it sink on my watch. "We're doing this, Dad," I'd whisper to the night air. "I'm not letting your dream die. I'm not one for the glitz and glam, give me muddy boots and Dawn's first light over a fancy dress any day." But when the invite came for that charity dinner, something inside me whispered, why not? Maybe it was the endless days cooped up with fish and feed, or Mom's soft encouragement from her sickbed, her way of saying, "Live a little, honey." So, I swapped my overalls for the only decent dress I owned and stepped into a world so far removed from my own. The dinner was a whirlwind of faces and small talk, a sea of glitter and fake smiles that I navigated with polite nods. Then, out of nowhere, these two brothers, Jake and Chris, crashed into my world. They were like a gust of fresh air in a stifled room, with their easy laughs and lack of pretense. "Never thought I'd meet a genuine fish farmer here," Jake said, his grin infectious, as we stood awkwardly by the buffet. "Yeah, well, I'm rethinking my life choices as we speak," I shot back, unable to suppress a smile. His brother, Chris, chuckled, his camera never far from his hand, capturing every moment as if it was gold. Their jokes were simple, their demeanor unpolished, and suddenly, I didn't feel so out of place. When Jake asked about the farm, his curiosity seemed genuine, a rarity in these circles. "So, what's the big deal with fish farming? Sounds fishy to me," he joked, and I found myself laughing more freely than I had in months. His interest didn't wane as the night went on. Instead of boring me with tales of their online escapades, Jake listened intently as I spoke of my dreams for the farm, of the weight of my father's legacy on my shoulders. When I let slip about the farm's turnover in a moment of unguarded pride, his eyes lit up, not with greed, but with what I took for admiration. Damn, that's impressive. You're doing something right, huh? His words were like a balm, soothing the constant worry that I was failing my family. When he suggested visiting the farm, I surprised myself by agreeing. Watching him and Chris wander through the hatcheries, their laughter bouncing off the water, something in me shifted. Jake's excitement at everything, from the most mundane task to the intricate details of fish breeding, felt like a validation of everything I'd been striving for. You know, I could get used to this, Jake said, his hand brushing mine as we stood watching the sunset over the pond. His voice held a warmth that made my heart skip. It was crazy, all of it, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something new, something thrilling. Mom, ever the voice of reason, didn't share my enthusiasm. Be careful, dear. Men like him, they don't settle well with our kind of life. It's too real for them, she warned, her voice frail but filled with concern. I wanted to believe her, I did. But Jake's promises, his vows to stand by me, to embrace the farm life, they wove a spell I desperately wanted to cling to. He's different, Mom. He wants this, us, more than anything else, I defended, my voice laced with a hope I hadn't felt since Dad passed. Our wedding was a simple affair, a celebration of love amidst the backdrop of our life's work. Chris filmed it all, his camera capturing the raw, unfiltered joy of two worlds colliding. The farm, with its endless skies and the gentle lull of water, bore witness to our vows. It was perfect, despite the nagging doubt that occasionally whispered, "What if Mom's right?" Life on the farm took a new turn when Jake moved in. Initially, his enthusiasm seemed genuine. He'd wander around with his camera, capturing every mundane task as if it were a spectacle. But as days turned into weeks, the facade began to crumble. "Hey, babe, watch this," he'd call out, gesturing for me to redo a task, just so he could get a better angle. It was all for show. The reality hit hard one afternoon as I was knee-deep in pond maintenance, and Jake was nowhere to be found. I spotted him eventually, lounging under the shade of an old oak, phone in hand, lost to the world. Marching over, I couldn't hide my frustration. "Thought you were gonna help today. These ponds don't clean themselves, you know." He looked up, a lazy smile spreading across his face. I am. Just taking a little break. Gotta keep the fans updated, right? It was the same excuse every time. His help was minimal, his interest fleeting unless it served his online persona. Even when he did pitch in, it was half-hearted, his efforts more a hindrance than a help. I remember the first time I tried to teach him about the feed ratios for the trout. "So, you gotta make sure it's precise. Too much and you're wasting feed, too little and they won't grow right," I explained, handing him the scoop. He took it, nodding, but his attention was elsewhere. "Got it. But hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a dramatic feeding frenzy video? Imagine the views on that." The seriousness of our work, the balance of life in our hands, reduced to mere content for views. It grated on me, but love has a way of painting red flags as mere decorations. My mom, ever the observant one, despite her illness, saw through him from the start. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, she took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "That boy, he's not here for the farm, or for you, not really. You see it, don't you?" I wanted to deny it, to defend him, but the word stuck in my throat. Deep down, I knew. Yet, acknowledging it felt like admitting a defeat I wasn't ready to face. After yet another day, where his promise to help turned into hours of him fiddling with his phone, I had enough. "Jake, I really need you to actually help around here. Not just for show," I said, the annoyance clear in my voice as I wiped the sweat from my brow. The farm wasn't a playground, it was hard work, and I was doing it all. He paused, something in his expression shifting. For a moment, I thought maybe he finally got it. "Look, I know I haven't been all hands-on with the farm stuff," he started, his tone surprisingly serious. His eyes flicked to his brother, who was leaning against the barn door, watching us. "But how about I handle the finances, huh? Take that load off you?" His brother nodded, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. A silent conversation seemed to pass between them, one I wasn't privy to. It gave me pause, but the sheer thought of having one less thing on my to-do list was tempting. "You sure you're up for that?" I asked, skepticism heavy in my voice. Managing the books wasn't glamorous work, but it was critical to keeping the farm afloat. "Yeah, babe, I got this. Trust me," Jake said, with a confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. His brother pushed off from the door and added, "Jake's got a head for numbers. You won't regret it." Maybe it was the exhaustion talking, or the part of me that still wanted to believe in the man I married, but I agreed. "All right, you take over the finances." "But Jake, this is serious. We can't afford any mistakes." He nodded eagerly, almost too eagerly. "You got it. I'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a thing." 6 months into our marriage, Jake hit a rough patch with his vlogging. Views were down, and so was the money. One evening, he dropped the bombshell. "Babe, I gotta head to the city, figure some stuff out with my brother. The channel's tanking," he said, not even looking up from his phone. I was slicing vegetables for dinner, and I paused, knife in midair. "And what about the farm? What about us?" My voice was calm, but inside, I felt a storm brewing. He shrugged, packing his camera gear with more care than he'd ever shown our life together. "It's just for a while. You can handle things here, right?" I nodded, tight-lipped. Deep down, I knew I could handle the farm, I always had. But watching him walk out that door, I felt a loneliness clamp down on me, cold and unforgiving. Not 2 weeks later, Mom's health took a nosedive. She had been my rock, and now she was slipping through my fingers. When she passed, I was a mess. I called Jake, desperate for a shred of comfort. "Jake, Mom's gone. I need you." I sobbed into the phone. There was a pause, and then, "Babe, I'm swamped. The city's buzzing, and we're onto something big. I can't just drop everything." His words hit like a slap. Too busy. For his own wife's grief. I hung up, the phone slipping through my numb fingers. 3 agonizing months later, Jake decided to grace us with his presence. He strutted onto the farm as if he hadn't abandoned me, when I needed him most. "Look at this place. It's been too long. But hey, I've got news," he announced, a grin plastered on his face. I was in the middle of feeding the fish, my hands covered in muck. "News?" I echoed, not sure I wanted to hear what he considered important. "Yeah, found a new feed supplier. Cheaper, faster growth. We're gonna save a ton," he said, his eyes alight with what I assumed was a rare flicker of responsibility. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "We don't use chemicals, Jake. You know this. Our reputation is built on quality, natural growth." He waved me off, his excitement undimmed. It's just business, babe. We need to think about profits. Besides, I've got even bigger plans." That caught my attention. "Bigger plans?" He nodded, eagerly. "A massive event right here. Celebrities, influencers, the works. It'll put us on the map." I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling. "An event? With all these people, and fireworks? Do you even understand what that could do to the fish, to the farm?" His face fell into a frown, his patience thinning. "It's decided, all right? It's gonna be epic." I watched, helpless, as the preparations began. Trucks rolled in, carrying equipment that had no place on a farm. Tents sprung up like mushrooms after rain, transforming the land into a foreign spectacle. As the day of the event dawned, the farm no longer felt like my sanctuary. It was invaded, overtaken by strangers with no care for the life we nurtured. The air buzzed with anticipation, a stark contrast to the usual serene mornings. Jake was everywhere, playing the gracious host, while I lingered on the sidelines, watching the chaos unfold. The fish ponds were off limits, but that didn't stop the occasional guest from wandering too close, their curiosity piqued by the very heart of our farm they knew nothing about. As evening approached, the concert began. Music vibrated through the air, an alien sound against the backdrop of nature. I watched from afar, my heart sinking with each beat. Then came the fireworks. Bright, loud, and utterly terrifying. I could only imagine the panic it caused beneath the water's surface, the home to our precious fish, now a battleground of noise and light. The fireworks had just fizzled out, leaving behind a smoky silence that hung over the farm like a bad omen. I was clearing up some of the mess left by the guests when I heard them, Jake and his brother, huddled together in the shadows, their voices low but charged with excitement. "That was epic, man. Did you see the views rolling in? Our channel's gonna explode after this," Jake boasted, his voice carrying a note of triumph that made my skin crawl. His brother chuckled, a greasy sound that filled the night. "Yeah, those clowns eat it right up. Fools, all of 'em. Easy as pie." I crept closer, hidden by the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the man I married, speaking so coldly, so calculatingly about the very people who supported him. Then their conversation took a turn, sending shivers down my spine. "So, about the farm," Jake's brother whispered, his voice barely audible. "You think she'll fall for it?" Jake snorted, a sound dripping with contempt. "Of course, she will. She's clueless, a complete fool. Just a little charm, and she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. Might not even have to forge it." They shared a low, conspiratorial laugh, and something in me broke. My mother's warnings, the doubts I'd pushed aside, all came crashing down in that moment. The next evening, at dinner, I faced them both. Jake, with his easy smile and lying eyes, and his brother, the silent accomplice. They exchanged quick glances, thinking I was none the wiser. I smiled back, a mask of complacency over my raging thoughts. "Dinner's great, isn't it? Hope the farm's growing on you, Jake," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "Oh, it is. It's fantastic here, Anna. We're gonna do great things," he replied, reaching for my hand across the table. His touch, once comforting, now felt like a serpent's coil. His brother nodded, adding, "Yeah, we've got big plans. This place has so much potential." I withdrew my hand gently, still smiling. "I'm glad to hear it. I've got some plans of my own, you know. For the farm." They paused, a flicker of unease crossing their faces. "Oh? Like what?" Jake asked, his voice edged with a hint of caution. "Just some ideas I've been toying with. You'll see," I said, keeping my tone light, airy, as if I hadn't just uncovered their betrayal. Right after the dust settled from that fiasco of an event, I knew I had to do something drastic. First stop was the family lawyer, Mr. Davis. His office smelled of leather and old books, a comfort in the chaos. "Mr. Davis, I need to lock down the farm's finances. Jake can't have access anymore," I said, straight to the point. He raised his eyebrows, peering at me over his glasses. "That serious, Anna? All right, let's get the paperwork started." Then, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a PI, a guy named Carl, who had a reputation for getting to the bottom of things. A week later, he laid it all out for me. Jake and his brother had been funneling money out of the farm, spending it on their wild ideas and pocketing the rest. My heart sank. I was furious, not just at them, but at myself, for letting it happen. Armed with evidence, I marched to the police station. Handing over the documents, I felt a mix of relief and dread. "They've been stealing from the farm," I told the officer, my voice steady, despite the storm inside. When Jake and his brother got picked up by the cops, Jake had the nerve to call me. "Anna, you gotta bail us out. It's a misunderstanding," he pleaded over the phone. I couldn't help but laugh. "Misunderstanding? I think it's pretty clear. Enjoy your stay," I replied, hanging up with a click. It felt like a weight lifted, but there was still work to do. I decided to go public with the whole mess. If Jake loved the spotlight so much, he was about to get it, just not in the way he wanted. I called up a local TV station and some of Jake's rival bloggers. "Come to the farm. See what his grand plans did," I told them. They came, cameras and all, capturing the aftermath of the event. Dead fish floated in the ponds, victims of the loud explosions and chaos. The smell was awful, a tangible sign of the damage done. Standing there, in front of the cameras, I told the story. This is what happens when fame and greed take over. This was our livelihood, and they nearly destroyed it for views. The backlash was immediate. The internet exploded with the truth of their actions, showcasing the dead fish, the ruined farm. Cartoonists had a field day with the brothers, turning them into caricatures of greed and folly. Jake's channel? It tanked, losing followers faster than a sinking ship sheds cargo. Advertisers pulled out, not wanting to touch him or his brother with a 10-foot pole. I wasn't done, though. Fueled by rage and a need for justice, I filed for divorce and slapped them with a lawsuit for every penny they cost me and the farm, tallying up to a cool $1,500,000. It felt like declaring war, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally fighting back. Riding the wave of support, I started my own YouTube channel. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my story, my family's legacy. Surprisingly, or maybe not so much, people rallied around me. Subscribers poured in, eager to see the farm's comeback story unfold. Jake tried to weasel his way back in, calling, texting, showing up with lame apologies. "Babe, let's talk about this. We can fix it," he'd plead, but I was done. Done with lies, done with him. I had a farm to rebuild and a future to secure. The court's decision was the final nail in the coffin of their schemes. The judge awarded me $1 million in damages. Watching Jake and his brother scramble to pay up, on top of facing charges for attempted fraud, was more satisfying than I'd like to admit. They were finished, professionally and publicly. The verdict was clear: they were frauds, and everyone knew it. In the end, they lost everything: their followers, their credibility, and any respect they might have had. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the farm, now bustling with life and more vibrant than ever. Standing by the fence, I watched the new day dawn, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long while. Mike, my oldest employee, walked up, a coffee mug in each hand, and handed me one. "Mornin', Anna. Looks like it's gonna be a good day." I took a sip, the warm bitterness of the coffee grounding me. "Yeah, it does. We've come a long way, haven't we?" He nodded, leaning on the fence beside me. "Sure have. Never thought I'd see this place lookin' this lively again. Those ornamental fish tanks are something else." Laughing, I glanced at the gleaming tanks filled with vibrant colors, a far cry from the traditional trout ponds we were used to. "They're beautiful, aren't they? And profitable too. Who would have thought?" Mike chuckled. "You did. That's who. Always knew you had a vision for this place. More than just trout and feed." The conversation shifted as we discussed the day's tasks when my phone buzzed. It was an email from a local school asking if we could host a field trip. "Looks like we're becoming a community staple," I said, showing Mike the email. "That's great news. Education's just as important as business. These kids could learn a lot from what you've built here," Mike said, a hint of pride in his voice. I smiled, the reality of what we were building here becoming clearer with each passing day. This farm wasn't just about recovery, it was about setting a new standard, about resilience, education, and moving forward. And as for the future? It was as bright as the morning sun stretching across the fields. There were plans to expand, ideas for sustainability projects, community outreach, and so much more. The betrayal that once threatened to define my story had instead paved the way for a new chapter, one filled with hope, growth, and new horizons. Mike's voice pulled me back to the present. "Ready to get started? Those fish aren't gonna feed themselves." Laughing, I nodded. "Let's do it. There's no place I'd rather be." As we walked back towards the heart of the farm, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready. Ready to face them head on, with the same determination and spirit that had brought me this far. The future was unwritten, but for the first time in a long while, I was excited to see where the journey would take me. The world went silent the day the phone rang. It was Uncle Richard, his voice tight and choked. "Amelia, honey, there's been an accident." My breath hitched in my throat. Accidents happened, sure, fender benders, maybe a broken arm. But the dread that coiled in my stomach told a different story. "What kind of accident?" I forced the words out, my voice barely a whisper. A long pause stretched between us, punctuated by a sniffle. "A plane crash, honey. Your parents." The rest of his words blurred into a white noise. My knees buckled, and I slumped against the wall, phone clattering to the floor. 19 years old and alone. My parents, titans of the business world, Amelia and David Brooks, were gone. The following days were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and suffocating sympathy. My parents' will was clear: Brooks Industries, the company they built from the ground up, was mine. Me, Amelia Brooks, a college sophomore with a minor in literature and a major in freaking out. Uncle Richard, Dad's older brother, tried to be helpful. A gruff, old-school businessman himself, he clearly didn't know what to do with a heartbroken, anxiety-ridden niece who preferred Shakespeare to spreadsheets. "You need to be strong, Amelia," he'd say, his voice booming in my tiny apartment. Strong? I felt like a twig in a hurricane. The pressure was immense. Everyone expected me to step up, be the strong Brooks daughter. But the thought of walking into that corporate glass tower, filled with Dad's ghost and 1,000 judging eyes, sent a fresh wave of panic crashing over me. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Juggling classes, therapy sessions, and a crash course in business management left me perpetually exhausted. Uncle Richard, bless his gruff heart, hired a team of seasoned executives to guide me through the legalese and financial complexities of Brooks Industries. 5 years flew by in a relentless blur of board meetings, product launches, and late-night negotiations. The company thrived under my unconventional leadership. We embraced innovation, fostered a collaborative work environment, and most importantly, stayed true to Dad's core values of integrity and ethical business practices. One Friday evening, as I was leaving the office, Uncle Richard stopped me. "Amelia," he said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "You did good, kid. Real good. Your parents would be proud." His words, a simple acknowledgement, brought a lump to my throat. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't just keeping the company afloat. Maybe I was actually making a difference. Maybe it was time for a break. Maybe it was time for Hawaii. Hawaii was supposed to be pure relaxation. All I craved was sunshine, sand between my toes, and zero responsibility. For the first few days, I reveled in sweet idleness. I napped in a hammock like a lizard on a rock, and swam in the ocean until my fingers looked like prunes. But by the third night, the cabin fever kicked in. I showered, threw on a sundress, a rare occurrence for this jeans and t-shirt girl, and headed out to a beachfront bar that thumped with live music. I snagged a lonely stool at the end of the counter and ordered a drink that looked straight out of a cartoon, bright blue, with a tiny pineapple stuck precariously on the rim. "New to these parts?" A voice with a laugh that could melt glaciers came from beside me. I glanced over to see a guy, maybe a few years older than me, with sun-bleached hair and eyes that sparkled like the ocean. "Something like that," I admitted, feeling my cheeks warm. "First time trying a blue Hawaiian?" He raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "First time trying anything remotely fruity," I confessed, feeling like a bit of a grandma. "I'm more of a coffee-fueled workaholic kind of girl." We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He was Ethan, a photographer on a freelance gig. He was funny, easy on the eyes, and surprisingly interested in my workaholic tendencies. By the time the last drop of my sugary concoction was gone, I was feeling loose, maybe a little too loose. The normally shy and reserved Amelia Brooks seemed to have vanished into thin air. "You dance?" Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping a notch. The music had shifted to a pulsating salsa beat. I hesitated for a second, then shrugged. Why not? We hit the dance floor, Ethan's hand warm and light on my waist. Maybe it was the music, maybe it was the tropical island air, or maybe it was the sugary bomb I just drank, but all my inhibitions flew out the window. But the next morning, the vacation hangover paled in comparison to the real one hitting me. My head throbbed like a drum solo, and a wave of embarrassment crashed over me as I turned in bed and saw Ethan, sprawled out beside me, sleeping soundly. Apparently, my inner dancing queen had also decided on a post-cocktail bed partner. The following moments were a blur of mumbled apologies, Ethan chuckling good-naturedly as he recounted the night's events. I buried my face in the pillow, mortified. Images of me flailing around the room in a sundress flashed before my eyes. Oh God, was I that bad? Let's just say you had a lot of energy, he said diplomatically. Though, gotta admit, it was kind of cute. Trying to salvage some shred of dignity, I forced a smile. Thanks for walking me home, and everything. We talked for a while longer, a strange mix of awkwardness and a newfound connection. But as the sun started peeking through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room, Ethan said it was time for him to return to the mainland. I handed him a piece of paper with my number scribbled on it. Maybe, I said, the word hanging in the air. He took the paper, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maybe, he echoed. A part of me hoped Ethan would call, but with each passing hour, that hope dwindled. 3 months had flown by in a whirlwind of board meetings, product launches, and late-night negotiations. Brooks Industries was soaring, our stock price at an all-time high. Apparently, that accomplishment translated to powerful businesswoman on the evening news. There I was, plastered on the screen, hairstyled, a rare occurrence, suit impeccably tailored, the anchor droning on about my leadership genius. The next morning, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Amelia Brooks? A voice crackled through the line, a hint of amusement in its tone. Yes, this is she. Wow, didn't recognize you from the news. The voice chuckled. It's Ethan. Ethan? My heart skipped a beat. That couldn't be right. After our drunken Hawaiian encounter, I figured he'd filed me under forgettable vacation fling. Hey, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Fancy hearing from you. Fancy seeing you too, he replied. Listen, I'm in town for a couple of days, and I was wondering if you'd be free for dinner? We made a reservation at a fancy restaurant downtown, a place I'd only ever seen in magazines. When I arrived, my stomach did a nervous flip-flop. Ethan was waiting at the bar, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion catalog, perfectly coiffed hair, crisp white shirt, the kind of designer suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Next to him, in my jeans and trusty work blouse, I felt like a sparrow in a room full of peacocks. A wave of self-consciousness washed over me. Had I misread the whole thing? He spotted me and a wide grin lit up his face. He stood up, his smile turning apologetic. Hey, sorry, he said, gesturing to my attire. Didn't mean to scare you off with the fancy digs. Work thing, you know? I forced a smile. No worries, I said, trying to sound confident. Work dress code for me is more comfort over couture. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversation, peppered with nervous laughter on my end. Ethan was charming, funny, and surprisingly interested in my work. So, he said, leaning closer as we finished our dessert, I know this might sound crazy, but I really enjoyed our time together, both in Hawaii and tonight. I was wondering, would you like to, maybe go out again sometime? Properly this time, without the tequila-induced dance party? A wave of happiness washed over me. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a dream. Maybe, just maybe, I'd stumbled onto something real. I'd like that, I said, a genuine smile gracing my lips. A few months zipped by in a whirlwind of adrenaline-pumping adventures, candlelit dinners at fancy restaurants, and late-night talks that stretched into the early hours. Ethan was the perfect antidote to my high-pressure world. One crisp November evening, curled up on the couch with a glass of expensive wine, Ethan got all serious on me. "Hey, Ames," he started, his voice a touch deeper than usual. "We've been having a blast together, haven't we?" My heart thumped a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was this it? The question? "Shoot," I said, trying to sound cool even though my palms were already slick with sweat. He took a deep breath, then pulled out a small velvet box that shimmered under the soft lamplight. "Amelia Brooks," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You're everything I ever wanted in a woman, smart, funny, a total boss. And..." He hesitated, reaching into the box. My breath hitched as he revealed a ring that sparkled like a captured star. "Amelia," he continued, dropping to one knee. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes. It was happening. The fairy tale ending I'd secretly longed for since I was a kid, flipping through magazines with pictures of giant white dresses and tearful vows. "Yes," I cried, throwing my arms around him so tight I swear I heard his ribs creak in protest. The following weeks were a whirlwind of wedding planning, complicated by a visit from Ethan's mother, a glamorous woman with a perfectly manicured smile. "Amelia, darling," she cooed, her eyes twinkling. "You're going to be the new star of big business. Ethan tells me all about your incredible achievements." The compliment felt a little off-putting, but I brushed it aside, focusing on picking a venue and a dress that wouldn't break the bank, even though I could have afforded anything. Before the wedding bells could even be ordered, my lawyer, a guy who'd practically known me since I was in diapers, "Thanks, Dad," brought up the topic of prenuptial agreements. "Just a smart move, Amelia," he said, his voice serious. "Especially with your financial situation." We talked about it with Ethan, and surprisingly, he didn't put up a fight. We drafted a fair prenup, separate property stayed separate, and there was a hefty cheating clause with a dollar amount attached that could choke a horse. Let's just say infidelity would cost him dearly. The wedding itself might not have been the extravagant ceremony I could have pulled off, but it was perfect in its own way, small, intimate, and filled with the people who loved us most. After the I-dos, Ethan moved into my spacious house. I surprised him with a brand new car, his old one looked like it belonged in a junkyard, and set him up with access to our joint account. The next day, he quit his photography gig. "I want to take care of things here, Ames," he explained, a hint of nervousness flickering in his eyes. I wasn't sure what that meant, but after the whirlwind of wedding planning, I was happy to let him handle things at home. Life after the I-dos was like stepping into a whole new reality. My mother-in-law, who'd been sweetness and light before the wedding, turned into a walking critique machine. A woman obsessed with appearances, she couldn't stop commenting on mine. "Honey, those pants make your hips look wide," she'd say, her perfectly manicured nails hovering over my outfit. Or, "Darling, a little Botox would really brighten up those eyes." It felt like she wanted to redecorate me. The final straw came when she dragged me to a plastic surgeon's office. Stepping into that sterile, judgmental space made my skin crawl. The doctor, all smooth smiles and designer stubble, started circling me with a marker, muttering about enhancing my natural beauty. "And the chest area," he announced, his gaze lingering a little too long. "Frankly, Mrs. Miller, it needs some serious work." That was it. I washed my face in the bathroom, mascara stinging my eyes, and stormed out. My mother-in-law caught up with me in the lobby. "Amelia, darling, where are you going? Don't you want to discuss the doctor's recommendations?" "Recommendations?" I scoffed. "More like a shopping list for a whole new me." "I don't need surgery, I need you to back off with these stupid suggestions." Even Ethan started chiming in. He'd drop hints about updating my wardrobe or seeing a stylist. "Ugh, give me a break." "Honey," he began one evening, "maybe it's time for a new look. You know, for your image." "And maybe," I countered, "it's time for you to get a job." He looked like a deflated balloon. "But I don't want to work for someone else anymore, Ames. I want to be the boss." His words caught me off guard. The boss of what? An empire, he declared dramatically. My own company. I raised an eyebrow. Right. And what kind of empire exactly? He shrugged. Something creative. Like, design? Interior design maybe. The idea wasn't bad. Ethan did have a good eye for style, always rearranging furniture and picking out cool throw pillows. Alright, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. Let's do it. I hired the best consultants, helped him with the business plan, and even fronted him the initial investment. It was a risk, but I believed in him, maybe a little too much. The interior design firm took off faster than we expected. Ethan, surprisingly, turned out to be a natural at managing projects and charming clients. But his newfound success seemed to change him. He started coming home later, smelling of expensive cologne and sporting designer clothes. The cracks in our perfect picture were starting to show. But I was too busy building his dream to notice them. 3 years. Ethan's design firm had rocketed, fueled by his newfound business savvy and a carefully cultivated image. Today, we were in a bustling international business exhibition, the air thick with ambition and the clinking of deals. Ethan's latest project, a sleek, minimalist furniture line aimed at the luxury market, took center stage. I stood by his side, a silent supporter in his carefully crafted narrative. My contributions, the sleepless nights spent brainstorming concepts and the meticulous planning that went into launching the firm, had faded into the background. A voice sliced through the cacophony. Amelia. No way. Turning, I saw a familiar face, Mark, a classmate from high school who'd always been a bit in awe of me. Now, his grin was confident, his suit tailored to perfection. Mark. Wow, small world, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? He puffed out his chest, adjusting his designer suit. Big things, Ames. My firm's presenting our latest line too, sustainable furniture made from recycled materials. Pretty cool, huh? We chatted for a while, catching up on lost years. He seemed genuinely impressed with Ethan's project. This stuff is slick, Amelia, he said, running his hand over a sleek armchair. You have a real eye for design. Actually, Mark, a voice cut in, Ethan appearing beside me. The credit goes to me. She's just here for moral support, buddy. This is my baby, all mine. My stomach churned. This wasn't the first time Ethan had downplayed my contributions, but the blatant lie stung like a fresh wound. Oh, Mark stammered, looking slightly embarrassed. Well, congrats then, Ethan. It's really impressive stuff. The conversation fizzled out, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. Before I could say another word, my immaculately dressed mother-in-law materialized beside us. Her smile, usually reserved for award shows and charity galas, held a hint of something else entirely. Ethan, darling, she cooed, showering him with praise. I always knew you had this in you. Such a natural talent. Then, her gaze shifted to me, her smile turning tight. Leaning in, she spoke in a low voice dripping with venom. And Amelia, she purred, a successful businessman like him deserves a wife who reflects his achievements. Someone more beautiful, more stylish, wouldn't you say? The air hung heavy with her words. My grip tightened on my purse, the polished leather digging into my palm. With a curt nod, I excused myself and moved deeper into the exhibition hall. Talking to enthusiastic visitors about Ethan's project felt like a betrayal, yet the sting of my mother-in-law's words fueled a growing ember of rebellion within me. The adrenaline rush from the exhibition wore off the second we stepped into the opulent hotel lobby. Mark was there again, another unexpected meeting. A wide grin stretched across his face when our eyes met. Amelia, he boomed, extending a hand. Catch you at the exhibition, didn't think I'd see you so soon. Up for a coffee and some reminiscing? I'd love to, I said, then glanced at Ethan, bracing myself for a fight. To my surprise, he just shrugged, his expression unreadable. Sure, Ames. Go ahead. I'm beat. I'll head up to the room. Surprised, I exchanged a hesitant look with Mark. You okay with this? Won't my super successful husband get jealous of his ex-classmate stealing his wife away? I teased, trying to gauge his reaction. He chuckled, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. Nah, go have fun. We'll chat later. With a lingering unease, I followed Mark out of the lobby. We found a quiet corner table in a nearby cafe and spent the next hour catching up. The conversation flowed easily, leaving me oddly relaxed. Back at the hotel, the luxurious suite door swung open before I could even reach for my keycard. Ethan's voice, dripping with venom, filled the room. Honestly, Mom, he ranted, unaware of my presence. I can't take it anymore. Living with her, it's unbearable. Haven't touched her in months. My blood ran cold. My own husband, the man who'd vowed to love and cherish me, was talking about me like I was some kind of disease. I know, darling. Cooed a voice, his mother's, laced with false sympathy. But you have to be patient. The plan is working. A plan? What plan? My mind reeled, piecing together fragments of their conversation. That stupid interview almost ruined everything, Ethan continued, pacing the room. That's the girl from Hawaii, isn't it? The one with all that dough? Why did I ever tell you? The pieces clicked into place. The interview I'd done promoting sustainable design, they must have seen it and realized I wasn't some struggling artist, but someone with money. Greed, not love, was the foundation of our marriage. They'd used Ethan to snag a wealthy wife. Their voices dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. My breath caught in my throat. They were talking about divorce. But not a clean break, a messy, scandalous one. They planned to frame me for infidelity, giving them leverage for a huge payout. Suddenly, Ethan's earlier behavior made sense. Leaving me alone with Mark at the lobby, hoping to manufacture some kind of incriminating evidence. The realization filled me with a cold fury. Taking a deep, cleansing breath, I stepped into the room, my voice cutting through their hushed conversation. Ready to file those divorce papers, Ethan? I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. They both spun around, faces etched with shock. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. Save it, I said, my gaze unwavering. You're free, Ethan. Absolutely free. The taxi ride to the airport was a blur of adrenaline and newfound resolve. My phone buzzed in my purse, it was Ethan. Ignoring the call, I used the banking app to freeze our joint account. Let him explain that little maneuver to his mommy dearest. Back in my own house, the silence was deafening. The phone rang again. This time, I answered with a cool indifference. Amelia, what the hell did you do? Ethan sputtered on the other end. My cards are all blocked, and how am I supposed to pay for this damn presidential suite? Consider it an early termination fee, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. From now on, you're free of me and my money. Figure it out yourself. The next morning, I marched into my lawyer's office, the same one who'd practically shoved the prenup at me all those years ago. Armed with a stack of documents and a newfound fierceness, we started the divorce proceedings. While the legalese unfolded, I wasn't wasting any time. Ethan's designer clothes, fancy toiletries, and the ridiculous collection of sports memorabilia, all neatly boxed and shipped to his mother's place. A new set of locks adorned my front door, a symbol of the boundaries I was finally setting. The real power move, however, was yet to come. The design firm Ethan ran was actually mine. I called a company-wide meeting, my heart pounding a steady rhythm in my chest. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice firm and unwavering, Mr. Miller is no longer the director of this company. Later that evening, my phone rang again. It was Ethan, his voice laced with desperation. He babbled about missing me, begging for forgiveness. In the background, I could faintly hear his mother's voice, whispering suggestions in his ear. Kids? I scoffed. Seriously? You think that'll buy you back into my life? Find another rich fool to play your games with, Ethan. I'm done. He stammered something about the car, the one he'd always claimed to love. Bought with my money, honey, I said, a satisfied smile spreading across my face. So consider it another perk of your short-lived marriage. Hanging up, a wave of exhilaration washed over me. I'd learned a harsh lesson, but one that would forever change me. The divorce was finalized swiftly, the prenup ensuring Ethan didn't get a dime. With a newfound lightness in my step, I reached out to Mark, my old classmate. We grabbed coffee, catching up like no time had passed. Maybe it wasn't love at first sight, but who knew where this new chapter might lead? I'm Emily, just a regular girl working as a florist in a big city shop. Life's pretty straightforward for me: wake up, work with flowers, and sleep. But, let me tell you about the day that kinda turned everything on its head. It was a regular morning with the sun shining bright and the shop bustling with the usual crowd when he walked in. This guy, Tom, was a new face, probably in his late 20s, dressed sharp, and carried himself like he owned the place. He walked straight up to me with a confident stride. "Hey, I need a bouquet, something real special," Tom said, scanning the store but keeping a casual tone. I put together a mix of vibrant roses, delicate lilies, and some exotic orchids, making sure every stem was perfect. Handing over the bouquet, I couldn't help but add, "Whoever's getting this is super lucky. You sure know how to pick 'em." He chuckled, a bit of a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, it's not for a lady friend, if that's what you're thinking. It's for my mom. Her birthday." I felt my cheeks heat up a bit. "Oh, right. That's sweet of you." "Yeah, well, she deserves it," he said, his tone softening. "How much do I owe you?" After watching him leave, I shook off the awkwardness and went back to work. But guess what? The next day, just as I was arranging a new batch of tulips, Tom popped back in. This time, he had a different look in his eye. "Hey, Emily, right? I was here yesterday," he started, like I could forget. "Yeah, I remember. Need another bouquet today?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Nope, not today. Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee with me. There's a nice place just around the corner. My treat," he said, his gaze steady. I hesitated for a moment, not really sure what to make of it. Like a date? "Yeah, why not? Could be fun." He shrugged, looking casual but hopeful. I figured why not, it's just coffee. "Sure, let me grab my bag." That coffee turned into dinner, and dinner turned into late-night talks. Tom was charming, no doubt about that. He worked for some big tech company downtown, knew a lot about a lot, and made sure our cups were never empty. Before I knew it, I was laughing more than I had in months, and he was right there with me, matching my smiles with his own. After that first coffee date, things with Tom really took off faster than I expected. He was always popping into the shop or texting me to see when I was free. He liked making plans on the fly, and I guess I liked that about him, kept things exciting. "So, what's the plan for tonight?" I asked one evening as we left the coffee shop, the city lights starting to flicker on around us. "Thought we might catch a movie, then grab some dinner. How's that sound?" Tom replied, his hands tucked into his jeans pockets. "Sounds perfect." I smiled, happy to spend another night out with him. Movie nights turned into concert weekends, and dinners turned into midnight walks along the river. It was like we couldn't get enough of each other. Tom was all about the grand gestures too. He surprised me one night after a particularly rough day at work. "Hey, you look like you could use a break," he said as he walked into the shop, a mischievous grin on his face. "Yeah, today's been crazy. What's up?" I wiped my forehead, dropping a bunch of wilted daisies into the bin. "I think you need a change of scenery. How about we drive up to the coast this weekend? Just you and me?" He leaned on the counter, his eyes sparkling. I couldn't believe it. "Really? Like a mini vacation?" "Why not? We both could use some fresh air, and I know a great little place by the beach," he said, looking hopeful. That weekend getaway was something out of a dream. The beach was beautiful, the food was amazing, and Tom, he was perfect. We talked about everything under the sun, from our crazy childhood stories to our hopes for the future. It was during one of those deep conversations, under a sky full of stars, that he caught me off guard. "Emily, I've been thinking," he started, his voice serious for once. "Yeah?" I turned to face him, the sea breeze playing with my hair. "I don't want to scare you off or anything, but I think I'm falling for you. Hard." He took my hand, squeezing it gently. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Tom, I feel the same way." His smile then was enough to light up the darkest night. "Good, because I have something else to ask you." And just like that, a few weeks later, he was down on one knee, right there in the middle of my flower shop, with a ring that sparkled like his eyes did when he smiled. "Emily, will you marry me?" he asked, the shop filled with the scent of roses and lilies. It felt surreal, like a scene from one of those romantic movies we used to watch. But it was real, it was happening to me. "Yes, Tom, of course, I will." The cheers from my coworkers erupted around us, and Tom swept me into his arms, spinning me around. It was magical, unbelievable, and everything felt just right. When we told our families, they were over the moon. His parents hugged me tight, already calling me their daughter. My parents were just as thrilled, talking about wedding plans, and how they'd always hoped I'd find someone who made me smile like Tom did. Life after the wedding was bliss, at least, for a little while. But things started to shift when we found out I was pregnant. It should have been the happiest news, and it was, at first. Both our families were ecstatic, showering us with congratulations and gifts. But the reality of pregnancy hit me like a truck, and not in a good way. I started getting sick a lot. And I mean a lot. It wasn't just morning sickness, it was all day, can't get out of bed, can't smell anything without gagging sickness. I tried to keep working at the flower shop, but the scents that used to bring me joy were now my worst nightmare. One day, I was trying to arrange a bouquet when the nausea hit hard. I barely made it to the back room before I threw up. The decision to go on unpaid maternity leave wasn't easy. I knew it put us in a tight spot financially, but I had hoped Tom would understand. Turned out, I was half right. The day I told him about my decision, I could see the change in his demeanor instantly. His usual warm eyes went cold, and his voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. "Unpaid leave? Are you serious, Emily? How are we supposed to handle the bills with you not working?" he snapped, pacing back and forth in our tiny living room. I tried to stay calm, though inside, I was trembling. "I can't work, Tom. You've seen how bad it's gotten. And it's not like I want to be sick." His frustration boiled over, and he threw his hands up in the air. "So what, I'm supposed to just handle everything? What are you going to do all day, sit around while I bust my ass?" I flinched at his tone, feeling a sting behind my eyes. "I'll do what I can at home. I can still handle some chores, maybe start some freelance floral design from the house." "Great, Emily, really great. As if those little gigs are going to cover anything. We need real money." He cut me off, his voice laced with sarcasm. I felt so helpless and trapped, watching the man I loved turn into someone I barely recognized over money issues and my health problems. It was like a bad dream, and I kept hoping I'd wake up. "Tom, please, let's just try to work this out. We're going to be parents. We need to support each other," I pleaded, reaching out to him. He looked at my hand, then at me, his anger slowly fading into resignation. I know. I'm sorry, Em. I'm just stressed, that's all." But the apologies didn't change the situation. The days were long, filled with discomfort and loneliness, as Tom buried himself in work, leaving me to deal with the pregnancy and the house as best as I could. As the weeks passed, my pregnancy only got tougher, and the chasm between Tom and me widened. My days blended into a continuous loop of discomfort and failed attempts at normalcy. Trying to keep the house together was becoming a nightmare. One evening, Tom came home to find me on the couch, a cold cloth over my forehead, trying trying to stave off another wave of nausea. The sight seemed to set him off instantly. "Still on the couch, Emily? I thought you were going to handle the chores today," he said, his voice sharp, tinged with irritation. I sat up, feeling a surge of dizziness as I did. "I tried, Tom, I really did. But the smells, everything just makes me sicker. I can't stand for too long without feeling like I'll pass out." He threw his keys on the table with a clatter. "You know, when you said you'd handle things at home, I actually thought you meant it. But every day, I come back to this." I felt a sting at his words, a mix of guilt and frustration building inside me. "I am trying. But doing the dishes, cooking, it all just makes me feel worse." "I can't help it, Tom." "Well, maybe you need to try harder. We can't live like this, Emily. I work all day, and I can't come home to a mess and no dinner. It's not fair." His voice rose, echoing off the walls. The unfairness of his expectations weighed heavily on me. I struggled to my feet, steadying myself against the back of the sofa. "It's not fair to me either, Tom. I'm not just lounging around for fun. This is really hard for me." "But it's like you're not even trying," he shot back, his anger palpable. "All day at home, and what do you have to show for it? I'm out busting my ass to make sure we have what we need, and you can't even keep the house clean?" His words cut deep, branding me as lazy and useless, and shame washed over me. But the hurt was turning into resentment. "I'm carrying your child, Tom. Our child. Shouldn't that count for something? Don't you think I wish things were different?" He paused, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time that evening. "I know it's tough, but you calling it tough doesn't make our life any easier. I need more from you, Emily." The room felt colder, the air between us thick with unsaid things. "I'm doing the best I can," I whispered, my voice breaking. His face hardened. "Well, maybe your best isn't good enough." That night, as I lay in bed alone, his words replayed in my mind. I thought about reaching out to my parents or his, but I couldn't bring myself to worry them or admit how bad things had gotten. The idea of leaving, of taking refuge with my family in another city, flickered in my mind like a distant lighthouse. Yet, the thought of making such a big decision on my own was daunting. By the time I scheduled another appointment with my doctor, the tension at home was unbearable. Tom's patience was thinning by the day, and I was at my wits' end trying to balance my health with his expectations. Sitting in the waiting room, I practiced what I'd say to the doctor, hoping he might offer some kind of solution or at least validate what I was going through. When Dr. Lee called us into his office, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. "Emily, how are we feeling today?" Dr. Lee asked as he ushered us in. I glanced at Tom, who seemed disinterested, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Not great, honestly. The nausea is really bad, and it's causing some problems at home," I admitted, my voice shaky. Dr. Lee frowned, concerned. "Nausea can be tough, especially if it's severe. Tom, are you aware of how this is impacting Emily?" Tom looked up, slightly annoyed. "Yeah, I know it's bad. But we all have our burdens, right? I work all day, and I come home to more stress. It's hard all around." The doctor nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, it's hard for both of you. But it's important to understand that what Emily is experiencing is not within her control. It's a physical reaction to pregnancy hormones. Some women have it worse than others." "Yeah, but how long is this supposed to last? I mean, is there something she can do to just get over it?" Tom's frustration was evident. Dr. Lee took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Unfortunately, it varies. Emily, we can try a few different medications to help manage the symptoms. It's not about getting over it, but managing it so she can have some quality of life." I nodded eagerly, grateful for any help. "That sounds good, anything to help ease this." Tom shrugged, not fully convinced. "So, what? Are these meds going to fix everything? Can she start doing more around the house then?" "It's not a cure, Dr. Lee explained patiently. It's to help her cope better. As for household duties, it might be wise to adjust your expectations during this time. Pregnancy isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. Tom sighed loudly, his impatience showing. So I'm supposed to just keep handling everything? This isn't what I signed up for. The room went silent for a moment, the tension thick. Dr. Lee looked between us, his expression softening. Tom, this is a temporary phase. It's a time when support is crucial. Perhaps, considering some temporary help at home could relieve some of the pressure. I'm not hiring someone to do chores when we're already tight on money because of the unpaid leave, Tom snapped back. Dr. Lee tried again to explain, emphasizing the reality of my symptoms and the need for empathy and support. Tom, understanding and patience are vital here. It's not about one person doing more or less, it's about adapting to challenges together. However, despite Dr. Lee's efforts, Tom's frustration seemed only to grow. He stood abruptly, shaking his head. This is all just excuses, isn't it? You just don't want to do anything. I'm tired of this. With that, he walked out of the room, leaving me behind with the doctor. Dr. Lee gave me a sympathetic look, his disappointment evident. I'm sorry, Emily. I tried. One evening, out of nowhere, Tom dropped a bombshell. So, my boss, Mr. Henderson, is throwing a big party next week. He's a big family guy, loves seeing everyone with their spouses. That means you're coming with me, Em. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. The thought of a social gathering was overwhelming with how sick I'd been feeling lately. Tom, do you think that's a good idea? With how I've been? I started, hoping he'd understand. No, Em, it's not up for discussion. Mr. Henderson notices these things. It's important for my career that we both show up, he said firmly, cutting off any protest I might have had. But the people, the noise, the smells. I don't know if I can handle it, I replied, my voice weak, already dreading the thought. Tom's expression hardened as he crossed his arms. You have to, Em. It's important for my career. Can't you just try to hold it together for a few hours? The drive to the venue was tense, with Tom going over his talking points, while I tried to steady my breathing and calm my churning stomach. When we arrived, the blast of music from inside the venue hit me like a physical wave, and the mingled perfumes and food odors made my head spin. Remember, smile and try to look like you're having a good time, Tom whispered as we entered, his grip on my arm a bit too tight. I nodded weakly, managing a smile as a few of Tom's colleagues came over to introduce themselves. They were all smiles and handshakes, but all I could focus on was the overwhelming scent of perfume and food. It wasn't long before I felt the nausea rise, fast and unforgiving. Tom, I need to step outside for a bit, I murmured after a particularly strong wave of nausea hit me. Not now, Emily, he hissed, barely looking at me. Just hold on until after dinner, please. Trying to blend into the background, I sipped on some water, hoping to settle my stomach. But it was no use. Halfway through the dinner, I could feel a cold sweat break out over my forehead, and I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Tom, I need to go. Now, I said, my voice urgent. Tom looked at me, frustration and embarrassment coloring his features. Can't you see I'm in the middle of something here? He snapped quietly, his teeth clenched. I'm going to be sick, I whispered, feeling the room spin as people turned to look. Without waiting for him, I rushed toward the bathroom, but didn't make it. Right there, in front of all those people, my body gave up, and I was violently sick. The room went silent, save for the horrible sound of my embarrassment. When I finally stopped and looked up, tears of humiliation stinging my eyes, Tom was by my side, but his look was not one of concern. You just had to make a scene, huh? He muttered, helping me up not out of kindness, but to get me out of sight. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful, and dragged me into the corridor. Look what you've done. You're a pretender, Emily. Always making excuses. He yelled, his face inches from mine. I tried to pull away, feeling overwhelmed and scared. "Tom, please, I'm really sick." "Enough. I'm sick of your excuses. Get out of here on your own. I'm done dealing with this tonight," he shouted. He shoved me towards the exit, pushing me several times as I stumbled. Finally, he threw me into the hallway and stormed off. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, my body weak from nausea and my heart breaking from his cruelty. Leaning against the wall of the corridor, I felt utterly humiliated and abandoned. My tears were just starting to dry when I heard footsteps approaching. An elderly man, whom I hadn't noticed before, came up to me, his expression concerned. I heard some yelling. "What happened here?" he asked in a stern but caring voice. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears started again, and I found myself pouring out everything. "My husband, he just doesn't understand. He thinks I'm pretending to be sick because of the pregnancy. He left me here after I got sick in front of everyone." The man's face turned sharply stern as he listened. "What's your husband's last name?" he asked with an intensity that made me shiver. "Morris, Tom Morris," I managed to say through sobs. His demeanor softened a bit as he nodded, understanding the situation better. "Come with me," he said gently, leading me to a quieter part of the venue, away from the noise and the overwhelming smells. He found an empty table, pulled out a chair for me, and handed me a glass of cool water. Sitting there, sipping water, helped me calm down a bit. The man remained with me, ensuring I was all right. Soon, the solemn part of the party began, and he excused himself saying he had to take the stage. I watched as he walked up, and to my shock, the crowd erupted into applause. The man, now at the podium, started praising his employees for their commitment to family values. Then, his tone changed, and he started talking about respect for one's spouse. "There is a man here," he said, turning to look directly at Tom, "who has failed to show the respect and support a husband should to his wife." Tom's face went pale as he was called up to the stage. I watched, frozen, as Tom walked up to join the man, the same man who had just helped me. "My wife and I have 4 children," the man continued, his voice stern and loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I understand how different each pregnancy can be. It is no excuse to mistreat or doubt your spouse." Tom tried to defend himself, stammering about how it was all a misunderstanding, how he thought I was just avoiding responsibilities. The murmurs in the hall grew loud, filled with disbelief and disapproval. The man on the stage, who I now understood was Mr. Henderson, Tom's boss, responded firmly, "That is no way to treat anyone, especially not your pregnant wife." His next words dropped like a hammer. "Tom Morris, you are no longer employed at this company. We respect family values here, something you've clearly forgotten." After the party, Mr. Henderson drove me back to my house. He made sure Tom wouldn't cause any trouble while I packed up my belongings. It was surreal, gathering my life into boxes with Tom's boss watching over things, ensuring everything stayed civil. Tom was silent, his anger from the night before replaced by a sullen quiet. Mr. Henderson didn't say much either, but his presence was a solid reassurance that I wasn't alone in this. Once everything was packed, Mr. Henderson drove me to a hotel. The next few weeks were a blur of finding a new apartment and dealing with the legalities of separation. When Tom's parents heard about what had happened, they reached out, full of apologies and offers to help. Despite everything, I was grateful for their support. They helped me cover the rent for my new place for several months. Life in my new apartment was quiet. I spent days preparing for the baby and nights wondering about the future. When my son Jack was born, it was like a light came back into my life. Holding him for the first time, I knew that no matter what had happened, starting over had been the right decision. Divorce proceedings were tough. Tom fought against it at first, but eventually gave in. Mr. Henderson was instrumental once again, providing a corporate lawyer to handle my case. The lawyer was sharp and empathetic, helping me secure a settlement that included compensation for emotional abuse and child support. The financial security was a relief, it meant I could start anew without constant worry. With my life somewhat stabilized, I returned to the flower shop. Mrs. Jenkins, my boss, welcomed me back with open arms. "We've missed you, Emily. The flowers haven't been the same without you," she said on my first day back. Working again felt therapeutic. Arranging bouquets, advising customers, and tending to the plants, I found peace and a sense of normalcy that had been missing from my life for too long. One afternoon, while arranging a particularly beautiful set of roses, my phone rang. It was Mr. Henderson checking in. "Just wanted to see how you and Jack are doing, Emily," he said, his voice warm over the phone. "We're doing well, thank you. Back at work, and it feels right," I responded, smiling as I snipped the stem of a rose. "That's great to hear. Remember, you ever need anything, I'm just a call away." Ending the call, I looked around at my surroundings, the colorful flowers, the photos of Jack I had pinned up by my workstation, and the gentle hum of daily life in the shop. It all felt like a new chapter had truly begun. Hey, I'm Emily. Since I was little, Mom and Dad, who never got past high school, scraped together what little they could for my college fund. They worked their butts off, believing education was my ticket to a better life. I busted my tail in high school, also I wouldn't let their sacrifices go to waste. When I got my acceptance letter to study investment management at one of the top colleges, we all cried tears of joy. My college days were hectic, but exciting. I juggled classes and a part-time job tutoring to keep some cash in my pocket. That's how I met Mark. He was a year behind me, kinda struggling with the coursework, and ended up being assigned to me for extra help. "Look, I just don't get this stuff," he'd say, scratching his head and staring down at the finance books like they were written in another language. "You will," I told him. "Just break it down into smaller pieces. Don't try to swallow it whole." Mark was easygoing with a quick smile that made the late-night study sessions less of a grind. He appreciated my help, and we hit it off, chatting about everything from music to our favorite TV shows. It wasn't long before those study sessions turned into coffee outings, then movie nights. One night, we were both at a college party, laughing over cups of cheap beer. "You know, I've always wondered why someone as smart as you hangs out with a dunce like me," he joked, nudging me with his elbow. "Guess I have a thing for lost causes," I shot back, elbowing him right back. We both laughed, and something about that night felt different. Maybe it was the buzz of the party, or just the right amount of beer, but I felt myself looking at him differently. We stumbled out of the party together, leaning on each other, half walking, half dancing down the street. "So, what do you say, Em? Wanna make this a regular thing?" Mark slurred, his words sloppy, but his eyes serious. I remember laughing, the sound loud in the quiet night. "Are you asking me out, Mark?" "Yeah, I guess I am," he said, and there was a challenge in his tone, like he dared me to say no. "Alright, you've got yourself a deal," I replied, and we shook on it, sealing our goofy pact with a high five that turned into us holding hands as we walked. Things with Mark felt natural, easy, like slipping into an old, comfortable pair of jeans. We finished college together, me with my degree that was supposed to open doors, and him just relieved to be done. Our relationship wasn't just built on love, it was built on a deep friendship, the kind you don't find every day. After we tied the knot, things kicked off pretty well for me career-wise. I landed a killer job right out of college, thanks to my knack for numbers and a bit of hustle. The pay was good, the benefits even better. Mark, though, wasn't having the same luck. He bounced around job interviews like a pinball, each time coming home a bit more deflated than the last. One evening, I came home late to find him slouched on the couch, staring blankly at some job postings on his laptop. "Any luck today?" I asked, dropping my bag and kicking off my shoes. He glanced up, a forced smile, not quite reaching his eyes. "Nah, same old, same old. I guess I'm too stupid." "Hey, don't talk like that. You're just in a rough patch." I squeezed his hand, trying to transfer some of my optimism to him. "Look, why don't you take a break from this? Let's go grab a bite. My treat. Mark closed his laptop with a sigh. Sure, why not? Not like I've got interviews lining up or anything. We ended up at a small diner around the corner, a place we frequented when we first moved in together. As we slid into our usual booth, Mark's mood seemed to lift a bit. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense attitude, came over to take our order. The usual for you too? She asked, popping her gum. Mark grinned. Yeah, and keep the coffee coming, Judy. It's been one of those days. Coming right up, hun. She shot back with a wink. While we waited for our food, I watched Mark play with the sugar packets, lining them up and knocking them down like dominoes. You know, maybe this is a sign, he said suddenly. Maybe I'm not cut out for these corporate gigs. Maybe I should think outside the box. I leaned in, curious. Like what? I don't know, something hands-on, something real. Not just shuffling papers and pleasing bosses. You'd be great at that, I said, meaning every word. You're good with people, Mark. Maybe something in sales? Mark chuckled, his eyes lighting up a bit. That might be a good idea. The conversation drifted as our food arrived, but I could tell something had sparked in Mark. For the first time in months, he seemed to consider the possibilities rather than dwell on the failures. It took a good while, but finally, he snagged a position. Not the dream job by any stretch, and the paycheck? Well, it was nearly half of what I was pulling in. I didn't mind the disparity, I was just glad he found something. But Mark, he took it hard. You could see it ate at him, being the one who brought less to the table. I just never thought I'd be the one being supported, he admitted one night, his voice low, almost drowned out by the hum of the microwave in our tiny kitchen. Hey, it's us against the bills, not you against me. I tried to reassure him, passing him a beer. We're a team, right? Yeah, a team, he echoed, but his half-smile didn't reach his eyes. Over time, though, he seemed to get used to the setup. The weight of paying rent, groceries, and everything in between fell on my shoulders, and I handled it without a fuss. I even splurged on him now and then, fancy gadgets, the kind of clothes he wouldn't buy for himself. Mark got cozy with this arrangement, real cozy. Started pointing out stuff in stores, saying, "Hey, that would look great on me, huh?" I laughed it off, clouded by love, thinking this was just playful banter between us. My colleagues at work saw it differently. He's getting a bit too comfortable, don't you think? They'd hint after I shared stories over lunch. I shrugged off their concerns, figuring they just didn't see the full picture of our marriage. He's been through a rough patch, it's my turn to spoil him a bit. I'd defend him, keeping my tone light. Just when I thought we had our lives on a steady track, the unexpected whacked us upside the head. The investment firm where I was making waves suddenly crashed, bankrupt, out of the blue. I came home that day, my head spinning, papers from HR clutched in my shaky hands. "Mark, you won't believe what happened," I said as soon as I walked through the door. I was met with the sight of him on the sofa, gaming controller in hand, mid-game. He paused his game and looked up, brows knitted. "What's up, babe?" "The company, they're done. Bankrupt. I'm jobless." He sat up straighter, the seriousness of the situation cutting through the usual homecoming chit-chat. "What? But you were just talking about a promotion last week." "Yeah, well, so much for that." I tossed the papers on the coffee table, a mix of severance info and legal jargon. "Everything's gone to hell, just like that." Mark set his controller down and came over to me, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "Emily, that's crazy. What are you gonna do?" I sank into the couch, the weight of the news anchoring me down. "I don't know. I need to start looking, I guess. But who's gonna hire someone from a tanked firm? It's like I've got the plague now." He rubbed my back, trying to be the rock I needed then. "You'll find something. You're brilliant. Any company would be lucky to have you." But weeks turned into months, and every interview ended with some version of "we'll be in touch," which really meant don't hold your breath. The rejections piled up, slamming me with doubt and worry. One evening, after yet another "thanks, but no thanks," I vented to Mark over dinner. "It's like I'm toxic, Mark. Today, one guy actually said, 'Sorry, but we can't risk someone associated with that kind of failure.' As if I personally ran the company into the ground." Mark shook his head, stabbing at his food. "That's bull. They don't know what they're missing." "Yeah, well, apparently they think they're dodging a bullet," I muttered, pushing my own food around my plate. Then the bills started to grow, a monstrous pile that seemed to taunt us from the kitchen counter. Each envelope a reminder that my savings wouldn't last forever. Mark tried to pick up extra hours, but it wasn't enough to keep up. One night, as I was crunching numbers, trying to make sense of our dwindling finances, Mark came into the kitchen, a sheepish look on his face. "So, about the bills." I didn't even look up. "What about them?" He shuffled his feet, a sure sign he was nervous. "Well, it's just, I'm not pulling in much. Maybe we should cut back some more. Maybe we could move to a smaller place? Or sell the car?" I stared at him, the reality of our situation washing over me in a cold wave. "We're really in it, aren't we?" Mark nodded, coming over to wrap his arms around me. "We'll figure it out, Em. We always do." Weeks of fruitless job hunting ground me down, each day chipping away at my savings and hope. The money was running out fast, and Mark, who had grown used to a comfortable life, now shouldered all our bills. This shift brought out a side of him I'd never seen before. One night, he exploded. "You're just sitting around all day, doing nothing." "I'm out there busting my ass, and for what? To come home to a freeloader?" His words stung. "Freeloader? Really, Mark? Who do you think kept us afloat all these years?" I shot back, my voice sharp with hurt and anger. He just scoffed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, past's past. What are you doing now?" "Nothing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the man I married. But before I could gather my thoughts to respond, the real blow came just a few days later. I came home early to grab some documents I needed for yet another potential job lead. As I opened the door, I froze. There was Mark in our living room, cozy with a woman I'd never seen. She was draped on his arm, laughing up at him like she owned the place. Mark straightened up, clearing his throat. "This is Anna. She's going to be my wife." The woman, Anna, looked me over with a smug grin. "He needs someone young and beautiful, if he's going to spend his money. Not someone who can't even keep a job." They laughed together, a sound that burned into my memory. I felt my heart shatter, rage and disbelief swirling into a toxic cloud in my chest. Then Mark did the unthinkable. He pulled out a stack of papers from behind him. "Here, divorce papers. I think it's time you moved on, Emily." Without saying another word, I took the papers. My hands shook as I signed them, each stroke of the pen severing the last ties I had to the man I once loved. I packed my things, my movements robotic. As I zipped up my suitcase, Mark and Anna didn't even pause their celebration. The contrast between their laughter and the tight, painful lump in my throat was too much. Walking out of that apartment, suitcase in hand, felt like stepping into a void. I had no job, no husband, and suddenly, no home. The morning after I left Mark, I woke up early, feeling displaced, but determined to start over. I had spent the night at a cheap motel, the kind where you pay cash and no one asks questions. I knew I needed a plan, fast. After a stale coffee and a dry muffin from the motel's vending machine, I walked the streets, aimlessly at first. Then, I remembered a beauty salon nearby, a place I used to frequent back in better days. The owner, Linda, had always been kind to me. Maybe, just maybe, she had some work, anything really. Linda was at the counter, her back turned, stocking some shelves. "Can I help you?" she called out without looking. "Linda, it's Emily. I was wondering if you had any work available." "Anything at all," I said, my voice a mix of hope and desperation. She turned around, her face lighting up with recognition, then concern. Emily? Honey, what happened? You look like you've been through the ringer. I sighed, the story spilling out of me, the job loss, Mark's betrayal, the divorce. She listened, her expression softening with each word I said. Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. Let's see what we can do for you. She pondered for a moment, tapping a finger on her lips. You know, I need someone to help manage the front desk, answer phones, schedule appointments. You think you could handle that? I nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. I'd be grateful for any opportunity, Linda. She smiled, her warm, reassuring self. Good. Why don't you start tomorrow? We'll figure out the rest as we go. And hey, about a place to stay, the apartment above the shop is empty. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. You can stay there for half the rent until you're back on your feet. I was overwhelmed, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Linda, thank you. This means so much to me. None of that now. She waved off my thanks. You'd do the same in my shoes. Let's not make it a big deal. Just be here at 8 tomorrow, bright and early. The next few weeks were a blur of learning and adjusting. Linda showed me the ropes, and I picked up the nuances of the beauty industry quicker than I thought. It was like I was slowly piecing myself back together, finding a new purpose in a place I hadn't expected. Mark and my old life seemed like a distant memory, a bad dream that had loosened its grip on me. I worked hard, stayed late when needed, and slowly, I began to feel whole again. But it wasn't just about surviving anymore, I was starting to thrive. Linda noticed too. Emily, you've really turned this place around, she said one evening as we were closing up. I'm thinking about expanding, opening another location. What do you think about running this one for me if I do? The offer took my breath away. Really? Linda, are you serious? As a heart attack, she chuckled. Think it over. No rush. As I walked up to my little apartment above the shop, I realized that this, right here, was my fresh start. My chance to rebuild not just my career, but my life. Running the beauty salon started to feel like second nature. Every day, I put in all I had, and Linda noticed. One morning, as we were gearing up for another busy day, she came in with her usual spark. Morning, Em. How's our little empire doing? Linda grinned, checking the schedule packed with appointments. Booming, I replied, flipping through the day's bookings. We might even need to think about hiring more hands soon. That's what I like to hear, she said, clapping her hands with excitement. Actually, that's kinda what I wanted to talk to you about today. Oh? What's up? I asked, curious about the tone in her voice. Linda motioned towards her office. Let's step into my lair, for a sec. Once we were settled behind closed doors, Linda leaned forward, all business. Look, Em, you've made this place shine. I've been thinking a lot about how we can grow, not just here, but really expand our reach. I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Are you talking about opening another location? Not just another salon, Em. I'm talking big. I'm planning a whole network of salons, and I want you in on it, not just as a manager, but as a co-owner. We'd split everything 50-50. Her words hit me like a wave. Co-owner? I echoed, the weight of the offer sinking in. Yes, Linda nodded firmly. I've seen what you can do, and I trust you. You're ready for this, and I want us to tackle it as partners. What do you say? The possibility of stepping up like this was both thrilling and daunting. Wow, Linda. I'm honored. And yeah, a bit freaked out. Linda laughed, that hearty sound that always put me at ease. Good. A little fear keeps you sharp. Think about it, but I'm serious. We could make a real go of this. We hashed out some preliminary ideas right there, brainstorming into the afternoon. The thought of co-owning a business was huge, but with Linda by my side, it felt possible. The next few weeks, I dove into preparations. Hiring, training new staff, and overseeing the salon operations became part of a larger plan. Our clients noticed the positive changes, and the buzz was infectious. Linda and I spent evenings at a local cafe, laptops open, plans sprawling across the table. We talked leases, decor, branding, every detail of our expansion. Finally, the day came to announce our plans to the staff. Everyone gathered around, excited and a bit anxious about the future. "Ladies and gentlemen," Linda started, her voice brimming with pride, "thanks to your hard work, and especially Emily's leadership, we're expanding. And Emily here isn't just going to be your boss. She's going to be my partner in this venture. We're in this together." The team cheered, and I felt a swell of pride and determination. This was my shot, our shot, to build something lasting. It had been 7 years since the divorce, and life had moved on. I was in one of my salons, chatting with Mrs. Peterson, an elderly client who loved getting her hair done here every month. We were laughing about something trivial when the door swung open, and there he was, my ex-husband, Mark, with Anna, the same woman he had left me for. I stiffened, but before I could say a word, Mark burst out laughing, loud enough for everyone in the salon to hear. "Look at this, Emily has become just a simple hairdresser. What a waste of all that fancy education." Anna chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Yeah, what a total loser. Guess the high-flying job didn't work out, huh?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. I felt every eye in the place on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. But before I could gather my thoughts, Mrs. Peterson stood up from her chair, her cape still draped around her. She pointed a manicured finger at them, her voice sharp as a tack. "You two ought to shut your mouths. This woman here," she waved her hand at me, "owns not only this salon, but a whole chain of them. She was just named one of the most successful young entrepreneurs in the country." Mark's laughter died in his throat. He looked like he'd been slapped. Anna's face went from mocking to shocked in an instant. "And another thing," Mrs. Peterson continued, her eyes narrowing, "I live next door to you clowns. Mark, you're hardly ever sober, and you get fired from your job so often it's a wonder you have any work at all." Mark's face turned beet red, from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. He grabbed Anna's arm, muttering something under his breath about leaving. As they headed towards the door, Anna suddenly whirled around and stormed back in, Mark trailing helplessly behind her. "I want my hair done here, and I want you to do it, Emily," Anna declared, standing defiantly in the middle of the salon. Her voice was loud, her tone brazen, as if challenging me directly. I raised an eyebrow, taking in her audacious demand. "Sure, I can do that. It'll be $250 for a cut and style with me." Her confidence wavered, her eyes widening at the quote. "What? I'm not going to spend a quarter of my salary on some hairstyle." Mark, looking defeated and embarrassed, tried to pull her away again. "Come on, Anna, let's just go." They left for good this time, with Anna still muttering under her breath about the prices. I watched through the window as they got into an old car that looked like it had seen better days. As the days turned into weeks, the incident with Mark became just another story that added to the rich tapestry of my life's unexpected turns. The salons were thriving, and with each passing day, I found more reasons to look forward with optimism rather than backward with any regret. One crisp morning, while I was arranging the new line of organic hair care products on the shelves, Linda strolled in, her eyes bright with what I knew was another big idea. "I've been thinking about how we can expand our brand. What do you think about starting a training academy right here in the salon? We could teach the next generation of stylists, pass on what we've learned." I paused, considering the idea. It was bold, like most of Linda's ideas, but it made sense. "That sounds amazing. We've got the space, and it could really set us apart from the competition," I replied, my mind already racing with the possibilities. "Exactly my thought." Linda clapped her hands, her enthusiasm infectious. "And I want you to lead this project, Em. You've got the knack for this, and I trust your judgment completely." The idea of leading such a significant new venture was both thrilling and daunting, but I felt ready for the challenge. "I'd love to, Linda. Really, it means a lot that you trust me with this. We spent the next few hours sketching out what the academy could look like, discussing everything from curriculum to licensing. As we talked, I realized how far I had come, from feeling defeated and alone to charting the future of a business I co-owned. Later that day, as I was tidying up after a busy afternoon, one of our regular clients, Mrs. Harper, approached me. She had been coming to the salon since we opened this location and had always shown an interest in the business side of things. "Emily, I've been hearing great things about what you're planning," she began, her tone earnest. "You know, my granddaughter is finishing school soon, and she's got a real passion for beauty. Maybe she could join your academy?" "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Harper," I said, genuinely pleased. "We'd be honored to help her start her journey. Once we get everything set up, let's make sure she's one of the first students." Mrs. Harper beamed. "Thank you, Emily. It's young women like you who inspire her. She talks about how you turned things around and made a success of yourself." Hearing that filled me with a warm glow of pride and a sense of responsibility. "We try to inspire where we can," I replied with a smile. That evening, as I locked up the salon, I thought about the future. There was so much potential, so much yet to achieve. The road hadn't been easy, but every challenge had strengthened me, every setback had taught me something valuable.